City Council conducts regular business meetings every second and fourth Thursday of the month at City Hall to decide on legislation proposals, resolutions, ordinances, agenda items, and of course, public comments. The schedule for regular business meetings may vary at times. Please check the website at cityofgolden.net for updates and changes in the schedule.
Good evening and welcome to the regular business meeting of Golden City Council, September 12th, 2019. Please stand and let's say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilor Weinberg.
Here.
Councilor Dale.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Here.
Mayor Sloan. Here. Councilor Karras Greaves.
Here.
Councilor Reed.
Here.
Councilor Hazen.
Here.
Do you have a quorum?
Before we proceed with our usual agenda, I would like to observe that yesterday was September 11th. The day 18 years ago that really our lives changed forever. We need to remember the thousands who never had a chance, the heroes who paid with their lives, the survivors who would never be the same, and the children who have grown up knowing only post 9/11 norms. Those children are now old enough to drive, to vote, and in an issue that we're going to be speaking about later, buy tobacco in Golden. So that's of significance that we have an entire generation that's known only post 9/11. But we should also remember the community feeling in the aftermath of 9/11. We set aside our differences and we approached common ground. We're still in the grasp of 9/11, so let's all remember that kindness and have a realization that we matter so much to each other and it could end in an instant. So thank you. With that, I would ask Ms. McClure to, we've done that, approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the agenda as written.
Thank you, Saoirse.
Second.
Thank you, Rob. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, it's the opportunity for public comment. And this is a chance for anyone who is interested to speak on matters other than those issues that actually have a specific public hearing related to them. And this evening, we don't have any such issues. So if you would like to talk to council about anything at all, this is your opportunity. And we'll ask you to come up to the microphone. You have 3 minutes to share your thoughts with council. And after everyone's had an opportunity to speak, you'll get a response from either council or staff as appropriate. Sheriff Schrader knows he's number one on the list. And he's going to show everybody how it's done. You give your name, your address and neighborhood, and then share your thoughts. Sheriff Schrader.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, councilors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak for just a few minutes. I am Jeff Schrader, the Jefferson County Sheriff, address 200 Jefferson County Parkway, Golden, Colorado. I am here tonight to ask the council as individual members and also as a council to endorse Jefferson County ballot issue 1A. And I know that may come before you at a future point in time for further consideration, but I want to tell you why I believe it's important. And my focus predominantly has to do with public safety. Public safety not only for the role of the sheriff, but how it impacts other organizations. If ballot issue 1A does not pass, I have already been put on notice that my budget will decrease, and with other impacts to it, it will net up to about a $10 million reduction in budget between now and January of 2021. So in the next 16 months, with that being in two separate flights, that budget being reduced will cause me to have to change business practices, and ultimately I will have to close down at the beginning of 2020 the 7th floor of the county jail. There are 5 housing floors. On that floor there are 288 beds, houses with typical housing patterns, about 245 prisoners. From where we are today in the population, by January, I'm going to have to reduce the population by about 180 prisoners. That can only be done 2 ways. I have a standing chief judge order where I will be reducing the amount of time that people serve on sentences up to 50%, and that will not sufficiently reduce the population to get to that target. I will also be required to make other significant adjustments, and I have put chiefs of police on notice that beginning at that time that we will in fact not be accepting certain levels of prisoners, all misdemeanors and felons, class 6, 5, and 4 of felons that do not have a mandatory advisement from a judge. These are significant, and I want to caution that that is only for 2020. That does not begin to address the concern that we have to face in 2021, where I will have to close another floor of the county jail because of the funding. In addition, I'll have about $3 million more that I'll have to go. The sheriff is not the only public safety official impacted by this. The district attorney's budget will be cut by about $1.5 million over that same period of time. There is no way to get around it in a district attorney's office to cut $1.5 million. That means attorneys would be reduced, and that means public safety policy will change, both through the district attorney's office and the sheriff. That also means that the availability of jail bed space for your police officers to put people in will be substantially changed. And my concern is that that will affect the entirety of Jefferson County in terms of the quality of life that we have. So my strongest urging to you, again, as individuals, to support that initiative, ballot issue 1A, and also as a council when that comes up in front of you at a future point in time. For more information about that, the website is keepjeffgosafe.com, and that's the campaign that I am working on so that we can do that, to keep Jeff Go safe. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you, Sheriff, for coming out to us this evening. Next is Monica Bulick.
Hi, I'm Monica Bulick. I live at 1818 Smith Road, which is the Beverly Heights neighborhood. My family moved here my husband and I moved here 15 years ago because we knew we wanted to raise our kids here in Golden. Max is now 13 and Ella is 8, and we love living in Golden because all it offers our kids: good schools, recreation, a safe community. Recently, I became aware, as the mother of a tween, of the vaping, even more so than ever before, and tobacco use and the increases in it. And then I did a check-in with myself because I'm also a public health professional. And I said, gosh, what my mom instincts are to stop this and to prevent this, are they validated in research? And is there research to show that we should make changes in our community to prevent kids from being able to purchase tobacco products? When I say tobacco, it's tobacco and vaping. And as I did the research with some other residents in Golden, I realized that the answer is yes. That there is research that's supporting my mom, protective mom bear instinct, that really supports 3 changes to Golden policy. 1, making sure that the sale of tobacco is licensed locally. That way retailers only have to follow Golden rules and Golden licensing processes. 2, with that, changing the legal age of purchasing tobacco to 21. It has been shown that it could lead to about a 25% decrease in tobacco use among youth. Also, what it does is it shows that if kids start at a younger age, they are more likely to continue tobacco use and, quite frankly, other substance abuse. And so it'll make a big difference. It also creates a gap between the kids who have it and the kids who are younger and shouldn't be allowed to have it. Socially, there's a difference between 21 and 18 and access for youth. And it makes a really big difference for how they're able to access it and the social acceptance of it. With that, the last thing that I'm encouraging you to change is banning the sale of flavored products. If you've ever gone into one of these stores, it's like an ice cream store or a candy store. And really, I don't think kids would know the difference. And this marketing is designed for children. It works. And we should ban the flavored sales altogether. Now, I know that right now there is a lot of media right now about the FDA possibly doing this as well. I know Golden looks out for our kids. I know Golden looks out for our citizens. And I encourage you to not wait and to make these changes now. Because there are kids right now who are being enticed by flavors. Their brain development is not such that they're thinking before they're acting. And that's right now. So I hope other policies change, but I encourage you to consider these changes without waiting for the federal government.
Thank you, Monica. Next, Garg. Hi.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Om Garg. I live at 615 24th Street. I am new to Golden. I've adopted this city as about 6 weeks or so. I like to go for a walk. And 2 times, Mesa, Stable Mesa is very enticing. Go there, see the view and all that. 2 times I tried to go there and ended up at the Rock. So could not go any further. Evidently, I was possibly took a wrong turn or so. I am requesting the council and I am offering my services also that we should tag or put the flags or maybe directions for the trails which go up to the top. So that will be very, very good in case it can be done. And as I mentioned, I am willing to help that cause and contribute whatever I can. The second thing, I came to know that we already have an ordinance for weed control. When I go for a walk, a lot of places, the weeds are growing to the extent that sidewalk is encroached upon. So I do not know how it is implemented and what it is done, but if it can be done, again, I am willing to contribute to that also.
Thank you.
So these are the 2 causes I am mentioning it.
Wonderful. And just to be clear, so we get you an appropriate response, you're speaking of going up South Table Mountain where the Castle Rock
One
is
is
it?
G and the other is Castle Rock,
Okay.
yes.
Great.
So from Street 19th, when I go, there are 2 entries. One is onto the right side, and then you have to walk a little bit, about 1 block onto the left up to 18th Street. And that is the one I'm talking about because that is the direct goes to Table Mesa.
Okay. That's, I just didn't want to give you an answer about North Table Mountain when you were talking about
That's right.
South Table
But
Mountain. So
if I
thank
go
you.
from Rimrock, I am able to go to both of them. I did not have problem.
Thank you.
These were the ones, once coming back, I was lost into the trees and all that. I had a bad time. All the thorns on everything on sticking onto my clothes.
Well-
And 2 times going up, I ended up to the rock.
Okay.
Once I ventured that I'm going to climb the rock, and I did, about 15 feet or so.
So
But
thank
second-
you and welcome to Golden. We appreciate your being here so
Thank you very much.
quickly after moving here.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Eric Vera.
Hi there. Eric Vera, 2133 Table Drive. Just had a couple of comments in regards to the confusion with 2030 last week that I seem to have brought up. The confusion stems from a statement June 5th in planning by Rick Maribi. and he stated, the 2030 policy document is intended to guide decision-making going forward. Zoning is different than that. It is actual rules of what you can and can't do. Ideally, zoning, the specific rules would be reflective of the policy document that have been approved in the past. This is what needs to be changed. This is what was stated. I took that to mean that they are not reflective. I took that to mean that 2030 doesn't matter in regards to zoning or whatever. There was also reference to whether or not there should be a timeline to revisit 2030. It's actually in 2030 that it needs to be revisited within 10 years, if not sooner, if required. With all the activity in Golden, I think that it's probably been long past that was required. There was a comment that what I said that was incorrect about it being used in form. I'm picking this out of 2030. City to proactively identify desired future land use and infrastructure patterns and forms, and not simply react to landowner or developer proposals. The community expects the city to define, manage, and to some extent, control change. I'm really not dreaming this stuff up, guys. I'm really not. There was also a comment that zoning and planning are things that were decades and centuries old and mocked our concerns. If we're going to rest on decades and centuries, why did we spend the money? Why did we accept money from someone else in a grant form to even undergo this? Why did we waste citizens' time and bring them out and ask them their opinions? And I don't know. You guys got defensive. You guys got a little upset with me last week, or the questions I had. But understand this. We're all in this together. I'm no different than you, and you're no different than me. We all have a view in this whole situation. And mine comes from my street, and my street's great. And I'm sorry that you guys don't have that view, because it's beautiful. It's awesome. It's the best there is in Golden, period. But we need to get back to basics. We really need to dig into this document more than we have. It's nice to cite it. It's nice to reference it. But you know what? We're either going to live it or we throw it in the trash. Let's decide. And I apologize, I'm going to be rude and leave. I'm already being rude, and I left a retirement party at my home. My wife is not super happy. So, thank you all. I appreciate everything. Have a good evening.
Thank you, you too. And that is all that we have signed up. But if there's someone else who'd like to come up, come on.
Hi, my name is Christy Bryce. I live at 2915 Sunset Drive. I've been a Golden resident for 28 years. What does that
I
mean?
want you to, could you please speak louder?
I'm a parent and a pediatric care professional, and I work in downtown Golden. One reason I've stuck around this town is because I really value our community and all its constituent parts, and the interconnectedness that we all share. I have 2 sons, and when my kids were newly minted licensed drivers, a network of parents decided amongst ourselves that if we ever saw our kids driving and making bad decisions, we would call each other. So if there was speeding, too many kids in the car, we would let each other know that that was happening. And I made calls, and I received calls, for sure. You know what happens? Kids make bad decisions. Teens make bad decisions. But the net of caring and love and concern work to safeguard our kids and our community and keep them out of danger. In the larger Golden community, Goldenites often use their eyes and ears and our connections to protect and help others. And I think this model of community care can be very powerful and effective. However, It is not enough to protect our kids from making bad decisions about tobacco, particularly vaping. Vaping is too enticing, easily accessible, covert, and addictive. The community of Golden needs City Council and the mayor, the leaders of Golden, to protect our youth. This is an all-hands-on-deck situation, so I call on you immediately to pass these changes to Chapter 4.96 of Golden Municipal Code. Locally licensed cigarette and tobacco products for all Golden retailers. Ban the sale of flavored tobacco and vaping products in Golden, and change the age at which tobacco products can be sold to 21 years of age. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Christy. And someone else, come on up.
No, Paul.
As part of her
Thank you.
Oh, okay. So, no, are there any other speakers who would like to come up? Preston?
Preston Driggers, 209 Burton Way. There's an adjustment in the capital improvement budget tonight that deals with open space, and I want to draw attention to it that I support that as others do. We have, every time we feel something is important, we do have plans that didn't exist even 20 years ago and others. Neighborhood plans, transportation, walkability, bike plans, sustainability, et cetera. So when something is important, we develop a plan, and the idea of master plan for an open space, its time has come and probably should have been some time ago. A lot of people assume that we do have some overall plan for our open spaces. We know we don't. So hiring a consultant at this stage is a beginning process. The hope is that it would entail a lot more people involved in the community from diverse perspectives, natural resources and other perspectives to help the consultant in the preliminary process. So again, I support that as you look at that adjustment.
Thank you, Preston. Is there anyone else? Last chance? Okay. I closed the public comment period, and since we did have a variety of issues, let's just take them in order, one at a time. Sheriff Schrader has left us.
I have a question, though.
If anyone would like to speak about 1A, Paul?
Yes. He spoke about the impact that 1A would have on Golden. And since we have the deputy chief with us here tonight, I wondered if you could comment on 1A and the impact it will have on Golden public safety.
So obviously the most significant impact it's going to have on the police department is our ability to be able to put criminals into jail, and particularly when we're arresting them on city charges, because those bed spaces will not be available. So the severe cases, obviously felony cases, are going to be charging in on a county citation anyways, or a felony warrant, so they're going to be going into jail. But locally, we do have some issues and deal with some chronic offenders and things like that, where we run out of the options of being able to say, okay, ticket's good enough, we need to send you on your way, where there are times where we actually have to arrest somebody and take them to jail. And in those cases, our hands will be locked because we will not have a place to take them. So it will have an impact on public safety, because we're going to have to figure out what other option may be available to us in terms of being able to place these individuals into protective custody and not just put them back out on the street.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good thought, Paul. Does anyone else have a comment to make about Sheriff Schrader's presentation? Jim?
Thank you. I believe the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens is some of the most important things we can do. And so we're talking about safety here, and I agree with the sheriff that the challenges that we have with the county budget. But it also affects the public health department. It also affects the social services. We cannot provide the services within the context of the revenue that has been, from my perspective, revenue being received by the county. And so I'm very pleased that the sheriff's here to talk about one aspect of it, and from a personal perspective, he has my full support, and that 1A has my full support.
Anyone else?
Oh,
Laura.
and maybe you're going to address it,
Well, but go ahead, Laura.
Okay, well, I mean, the person, he asked for two things, you know, personal support, and then if council would take it up as an issue of council support. So I guess I wanted to just, and maybe that was next out of your mouth as to what the thoughts were on that piece of it as a council.
You know, excellent. And 1A is not the only ballot issue. This year, we will be asked about Proposition CC and DD, and council will have to decide whether to take a position at all, and if so, what the position should be. So maybe during council comments at the end, we can schedule time to be discussing ballot issues that affect our communities so closely. So, good, thanks, Laura. All right, then we will put Christy and Monica issue together about vaping. We understand your concern. Council, responses?
Having spent 45 years of my life plus in public health, the issues associated with the diseases that vaping is causing now, it brings me great concern. And it's not just anecdotal things that's being studied in detail now. And the challenge is to try and restrict the access to these products which are causing disease and a significant, I shouldn't say significant, that's in a number of people. And so I think it's very important for us to look at this issue, to talk to it. Tobacco itself is a harmful drug. We're finding that just trying to put some warm oil or whatever vapors into your lungs is a real problem too. So I thank you for coming. It's a terrible, important thing, and I will look forward to voting on the issue, I hope.
Okay. Paul?
Well, we had a prod about Golden Vision 2030 from Eric, but at the same time, one of the values that is in Golden Vision 2030 is the health of our citizens. And those citizens certainly include our young citizens. And I think we should be mindful that when we talk about other issues like development that seem to occupy quite a bit of our time, that we don't give equal attention to health. And in this regard, I'm hoping that we can at least agendize this item for council action this year. And I agree that with the speaker, that we not wait for the federal government to act, that we take the initiative ourselves, because I have some personal knowledge about vaping at Golden High School, and it is present there. I will just do a minor aside to say that when I pick up trash on South Golden Road for Rotary, a year ago I'd pick up 20 of those little plastic whiskey bottles with several of them near the high school. This last 2 weeks ago, I was on South Golden Road and found 2. And why am I only finding 2 of those little? The answer is kids are vaping. Well, I'm not sure what's in there, and it's not just flavors, but kids are now doing something else besides swigging down a small plastic bottle of a liquid of their choice. So I think it is here, and I think it's happening, and I don't think it's healthy. So I just want to be sure that if the council agrees with some indication of thumbs up, that we put it on the agenda.
I would like to defer the thumbs up time until everybody's had a chance to talk, including me, because I have been looking into this quite extensively.
Good.
And I'd like to share that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Laura?
I mean, I think, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. It is an issue. It has been for the last couple of years in Golden. I know the schools are dealing with it and addressing it at Bell and at Golden High School. So we know it's here. We know it's a problem. You talk to, I happen to have 2 of them, but you talk to any kids in those schools, and they are very aware of what's going on. And I think that looking at it as not just as an issue or of a concern, but what do we do from a policy perspective, I think we need to take a big look at what's going on, because Golden is one piece, and there's certainly a lot of other things that cities have done, but also other conversation that's happening, and how do we build upon that to make Golden not just an island in the county or in the region, but where we can actually make a difference even beyond our borders. So I think looking at it for Golden, was a piece, but I think we should be trying to see who else is working on it and what else can be done in partnership.
Anyone else on this side? Casey?
Well, I'll just say I'm definitely in support of the 3 proposals put out by the group. I thought the level of research and details they put into that was really impressive, and I really appreciate you assembling all of that hard work to make our jobs a whole lot easier. So I would definitely support going forward. Like Laura said, with a high schooler and a middle schooler, it is extremely prevalent, and even my son says it's out of control when it's happening in the middle of class, and the teacher has an inability to stop it because it's odorless and they can blow it into their sleeve and do all sorts of things. So I definitely think we need to look at it and research it further. And I would just point out, I think this council has a really long, proud history of taking strong action to protect the public health of our citizens, starting with Karen Oxman and Pamela Gould and this council and Saoirse. We've got a long history of doing the right things, and this, to me, falls in that category of the right things.
Thanks, Casey. Saoirse?
Absolutely. I've long supported measures that would be evidence-based, research-based, that actually prevent youth from starting up the habit, not just vaping, but tobacco. And there has been the reference materials, and the research does indicate that it does make a difference. And I do also agree with the point that was made that we as a community demonstrate our care by the message that we send, by the things that we say are important enough for us to take the time to enact legislation to that effect. And so I think it sends a message to our community, to our adults, to our parents, and to our youth that we do care, it does matter, and we will make a statement. So I do support it, and I support I specifically support asking staff and our legal staff. I understand that there's been a lot already done, and that it would not be difficult to bring Golden into alignment with these ideas, that it would not be unduly time-consuming or complicated, that the template is already there. So I would support asking staff to look into it. And I would like to vote on it before I'm out. I'll just say that.
I agree with much of what has already been said, and I won't rehash it. From a cost perspective, I've reached out to some of our staff, and I do not believe the cost of enforcement would be great. I view vaping as a gateway to overall tobacco use, and I believe that the industry, including Marlboro Purchasing Juul, I believe, if I remember my companies correctly, shows that the tobacco industry is trying to leverage the flavored vaping. But I want to make sure we're not focused just on vaping. I think we need to focus on all tobacco use. And I think it's very important that in doing so, we raise the age for purchasing any tobacco product to 21. I know there's been a lot of discussion at the state and the federal level about their enforcement.
the worst-case scenario is if we pass an ordinance that is then taken up at the state or the federal level, then we've at least endorsed what they're doing. So it's not going to hurt us. And if there is anything that could affect our ability to get funding as a result of having inconsistent ordinances that are inconsistent with state or federal law, we can put a sunset provision in there. In terms of municipalities that have already passed laws, I believe Edgewater might have been the first in the metro area. Virtually every town in the Roaring Fork Valley has passed some sort of an ordinance. And so I think it would be relatively easy and cost-effective for our legal staff to put an ordinance together. So I would definitely be in support of moving forward on the voting age, local licensing, and banning flavored products.
Hey, you don't see any disagreement up here, did you? So we really appreciate your coming forward. This is something that is prevalent in our conversations, in the forefront of our minds, and certainly in our news feeds. And frankly, there's no disagreement up here, but it's also significant. There doesn't seem to be any disagreement at any level of the government. The situation is fast changing, and I've tried to keep up with it through reading, and I've also called Congressman Perlmutter's office and talked to him, and he expressed that he believed the bill would go through Congress this fall, and said the bill was actually Diana DeGette's bill, Congresswoman Diana DeGette from Denver. So I called her office, and I talked to her legislative director. She has sponsored a bill raising the age to 21, and her office to express optimism that the bill would become federal law this congressional session. Nobody was willing to guarantee it, but they use words like credible support and optimistic. And I thought that's a good sign. So it appeared there was no disagreement in the House. And then in the Senate, there is a bill sponsored by Mitch McConnell and Tim Kaine, and Nancy Pelosi has said she'd support it. Now the Senate and House bills do have different they called it mechanics. One would the Senate bill would make it much more difficult for localities to have more restrictive rules and still get funding from the federal government. And then just this week, there's a bipartisan proposal in the Colorado State House to raise the Colorado age to 21 for vaping and tobacco products. And as far as I could tell, I couldn't find any disagreement on that. Yesterday, President Trump stated his consideration for the other, part 3, I think it was, of Monica's request. And he proposed a federal ban that would take that would ban non-tobacco flavored vaping, and Diana DeGette came out and said, I'm with him, which has got to be a first. So now, Council, we're left to decide what to do, and I did ask both Ed Perlmutter's office and Diana DeGette's office, and they said they would be appreciative of local measures, whether it's a resolution or an ordinance. It would show the localities are interested in this as well. I have absolutely no problem with our going forward with this, but in my mind, it'd be so much better if it's statewide, so our kids couldn't, just get on light rail and hop off somewhere else. So statewide is better. Federal is even better. So in my mind, I'm with Casey. It's a question of how to get there right. ordinances that have a long life. You've asked for three things. One is local licensing scheme, and I think that's excellent. The other two are the fast-moving parts, the age 21 and flavors of vaping products. I think that will be ever-changing as council is considering it, but I think a good framework ought to be in place as things change. Ordinances have a long life, and we do want to get it right. So I believe we're all in agreement that we should look at it, but I think we also have to recognize that you know, there's at least first reading and second reading on an ordinance, and we don't want to just pop off and do it. But I understand Saoirse's interest in getting it done while she's in office. So, I thank you for all your work. What you've done to me is incredible because you have yes for an answer at every level of government, and I've never seen that before. So thank you for your work. Okay, next we have Mr. Garg, who is concerned about the trail up South Table Mountain, and I don't know who would best to address it, Mr. Slowinski?
Thank you, Mayor. This is something obviously we've chatted about a little bit in the past and have heard from, I know our Parks and Rec department is working with folks to try to make some improvements there. I think we actually have some money budgeted to make some minor improvements to the Lubon Trail. But certainly we can keep that on the forefront of our radar screen moving forward. And with respect to sidewalks being clear from debris, I know that's an issue that Councilor Dale is near and dear to his heart. And if you have instances like that, please let us know the address or location of where that is, and we can make sure we deal with it accordingly. Okay.
Laura?
And just the Lubon Trail in the CIP, it talked about both of those things, signage and erosion control, and the issue of the dirt and gravel washing into the street. So I think the proposal that was in the budget package addressed those issues if we go forward with it. So somebody's definitely been talking about it and thinking about it, and it is on the radar. So thanks for coming in.
Yeah, and you should know that it's difficult. It's a difficult trail going up to Castle Rock, and it isn't all public property. So, our Parks and Recreation Department is really looking into the best way to work it.
I was actually just going to say that our Parks and Rec Advisory, or Parks and Rec and Museum Advisory Board has looked at that particular trail, the Lubon Trail, in depth multiple times. So it's definitely in the works. You're not the only one that thinks it's got some problems.
Rob and then Paul.
And just one quick clarification that not the entire trail is within the city of Golden. So not to pass the buck to somebody else, but the upper parts of the trail are Jefferson County open space. So at some point, if your issues are higher up on the mountain, we may need to push you on to some other folks or have our staff coordinate with Jeffco Open Space. Thank you for coming in.
And Paul.
I noted that the freshman class from the School of Mines has projects each year to help in the community. Recent past, they had several of the freshman class working on Lubon Trail, trying to help improve it. So we are conscious of that. Number two, we have spoken with Jefferson County saying, look, you've got half the trail, we've got half the trail. Can't we just, would you please just maintain the whole darn trail? And we're hoping that this would work, but it's not worked so far. And finally, if you're getting up on the rock, you're on private property, don't do it. The actual Castle Rock, the trail goes up to the top of South Table Mountain. but the trail, if it is a trail at all that goes to the rock, that is private property. And the council or the city is not in favor of people going onto private property. So I just want to make the comment that we received your comment coming to us, but going back to you, we just want to be sure that the city does not want its residents intruding on private property, or by not saying anything, perhaps endorsing that. So we're not. Thank you.
Okay, nice spectrum of public comment this evening. Thank you all. And let's move on to, Jim.
I just wanted to say this year's rainfall and stuff has been tough on more than just Lubon Trail. If you go up in Peary, where the North Table Mountain Trail is just above my house, and it's washing a lot of dirt down, and from hiking the trail, it's just been tough on the trails. And so we need to coordinate with Jeff Cope and Space and look at within ourselves on how we can address that. So I just wanted to mention that it is impacting lots of trails. So thanks for letting me make my comment on that.
And one more thing,
Casey.
Paul, and then Casey.
I think Mr. Driggers also had a public comment, and I know we're looking at this.
Oh, right.
The
Mr.
CI.
Driggers.
I'm
Good.
just-
Let me, Casey, were you going to talk about Preston?
Can I just clarify one thing?
Okay.
I know we all talked about voting on thumbs, and are we going to talk about that at the calendar planning portion of our agenda further on what to do there? Or
I think the city manager just got the message
Okay.
that it will be on our agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll look at the appropriate date and we'll try to get it scheduled sooner rather than later.
Okay, perfect.
About that, I'd be curious, I don't know if it's talked about it, about vaping or tobacco in any of the other organizations we're part of, but I know like CML Policy Committee meets in October, and all of the submittals from cities for policy type programs was already due. We missed it. But I certainly will share if any of the other cities have brought that to CML's attention, and if any of the other organizations are also working on it from a multiple city perspective. I think that would be great for us to consider.
Casey?
I'm done now.
Okay,
I can come back to Eric Vera, a quick comment.
Oh,
You can go
okay,
in whatever
then
order. Yeah.
Preston,
There you go.
and then
Sounds
Mr.
good.
Vera, who's at a retirement party.
Great.
Yeah,
Well, I just wanted to mention in Golden Vision 2030, when we talked about the value theme B, which refers to the active and healthy community, under that subheading, it says, "We value the natural beauty of unique geological features, extended stretches of the foothills, and unbroken stretches of natural environments that define Golden as a place." So that's one of the, one of our values, and I think I may bring it up again when we get to the CIP, but I just wanted to mention to Mr. Driggers, he's well aware of this section.
okay, and,
I would just say, if Mr. Vera is watching from home in the middle of this retirement party, I appreciate him coming in and continuing to voice his thoughts and concerns. It's totally understandable to me that him and many of his neighbors are frustrated with what they're perceiving happening. But at the same time, I think it's important to note that you can't blame Vision 2030 if we didn't foresee a problem that had not previously existed and been raised in our code. And that doesn't mean that Vision 2030 is not being followed or it's a failure in any way. I think Vision 2030 is still guiding how we are relating to him and those neighbors, and being open and willing to converse and think through those changes. And in the same way, we're also guiding us to do bigger planning code changes and envision other efforts, like we're discussing next Wednesday with the Planning Commission with our code audit and rewriting effort. All of that is a sign that we are taking those values of Vision 2030 very seriously. And but that's not to say it's totally understandable for him to be very frustrated and upset with what they're perceiving in their neighborhood. So.
anyone else? Rob?
Just to close the loop on what Casey was referencing, the next phase of discussion of changes to the code will be sort of kicked off next Wednesday at a planning commission meeting at 6:30 right here. And that will be a discussion of an audit and then potential rewrite of our zoning code. So anybody that's interested, whether it's somebody that lives on Table Drive or anywhere in the city, please stay in touch with us. It's a very important issue.
Laura?
I just want to touch on what he said about reviewing 2030, because we've had a lot of conversation about that, but I'm not sure that that's been clear, that, you know, we have had as a council, you know, we did this year and I think the year before, or for the last couple of years, that conversation of, do we need to have a project? Do we need to have a review of Vision 2030, you know, as it's getting to its 10-year? And so it's not, as I think he was suggesting, that there's no plan for reviewing, and it, you know, we've had those conversations and we've really spent considerable, you know, thought on whether it needs updating or if things have changed. And as a body, you know, City Council has kind of said the last couple of times we've reviewed it that these are enduring values. The city has not changed who we are, and these are still our values, and therefore, you know, starting over or revisiting or doing a major overhaul isn't required. So I just wanted to put that out there, because we have had these conversations and we have really thought about the lasting value of 2030, and the work that was done 10 years ago is just as relevant today.
Thanks. And last word comes from our resident expert.
Resident expert. Well, what that means is that I'm a champion. I'm a designated champion for Golden Vision 2030. And at least annually, I go and meet with all the other people who had this same process brought into their communities by the Orton Family Foundation. It was originally called the Heart and Soul process, and other communities call it Heart and Soul. We call it Golden Vision 2030. So as a matter of fact, in 2 weeks, I am going to that annual gathering. And the past 2 years in a row, we have, as a group, talked about the early cities, and we were around one city. So we are, in fact, one of those early cities that underwent this process. About what can we do, what can be done, what needs to be done in terms of refreshing, reminding, you know, what kind of process would be useful to the communities 10 years out, which is where we are. And there's been discussion about that process, and there's also been discussion about potentially how to fund that, how to support such measures. So, and I've always stuck my hand up and said, we're very interested in at least having the conversation. So once again, we'll see what that conversation might be at the national level for the people who engaged with us and helped us work through this process.
So, thank you. I think that might have been the first time when council staff response to public comment went on longer than public comment. And I have to take quite a share of blame for that. So thank you again for coming in, and let's move on in the agenda. Is there a motion on consent matters?
I move that we approve the consent matters. Woo! As written.
Good. Thanks, Saoirse.
I second.
Thank you, Casey. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. They are adopted. Next, we have a proclamation concerning Constitution Week. Casey. Yeah.
All right, I have a proclamation here. We're going to deliver it here from the bench. It's a proclamation that says, whereas September 17th, 2019 marks the 232nd anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America by the Constitutional Convention, and whereas it is fitting and proper to officially recognize this magnificent document and the anniversary of its creation, and whereas it is fitting and proper to officially recognize the patriotic celebrations which will commemorate the occasion. And whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issuing of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States of America designating September 17th through the 23rd as Constitution Week, therefore, Marjorie Sloan, Mayor of the City of Golden, by virtue of the authority vested in her, does hereby proclaim the week of September 17th through 23rd, 2019 as Constitution Week in the City of Golden, and asks our citizens to reaffirm the ideals the framers of the Constitution had in 1787.
Thank you, Casey. We're looking forward to a presentation from the Utility Rate Study Citizens Committee. And Ann Byerly and Joe, are you going to kick us off?
Let me see how well my technology is working. Let's see.
I'm glad there's no questions about the Constitution.
How cool is that? Good evening, Council. I'm Ann Byerly. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Works. We are here tonight to talk about the results of the utility rate study. We're going to kick it off a little bit with just a few minutes about the 3 utilities that were subject to the rate study. And then I'm actually going to turn it over to Tanya Rauch-Williams, who is was one of our members of the Citizens Committee. She's going to talk you through the process that they went through and the recommendations that they made regarding the rate structures for the 3 utilities. And then I'll kind of tie it back up at the end and talk about our recommendations on how that translates to numbers, because that's probably one of the things that gets people piques interest. We have in Golden 3 utilities. We have a water utility, a wastewater utility, and a stormwater utility. And wastewater and stormwater aren't the same thing. I'll let Joe tell you exactly why they're a little bit differently. But they're funded separately, and when you get your utility bill every month now, each one of these has their own separate line item. The fees cover the operating costs and asset maintenance and upkeep for each of these utilities independently. The money within the funds that are collected, the fees that are collected for each fund, work for those funds all by themselves and exclusively. You can't, your water bill doesn't help pay for sewage treatment. Your drainage bill doesn't help pay for water treatment plant. And none of those can go to other aspects of the city, such as the police department or a park. We are fund. We're a separate fund and distinct and stand on our own. Okay, so water and sanitation in the city, the Golden utility covers almost all of the water, provides almost all in the water and wastewater services in the city, but we don't get it all. The Coors Tech Center, which in this picture is Technology Center, is in yellow, is served by Table Mountain, both water and sanitation. And down in the West Third area, Golden provides water and we provide wastewater collection, but unlike the rest of the city, the sewer in that area is provided by Metro through Pleasant View. And whereas all of the area in light blue here, wastewater sewer goes to Coors for treatment. So distinct and a little different. The water utility, we provide potable water to 5,473 homes and businesses in the city. We have 3 raw water reservoirs up Clear Creek Canyon. We have a transbasin tunnel that we divert water from the Peru Creek into Clear Creek. We maintain and operate a 12 million gallon per day water treatment plant right down the street next to Clear Creek. And we maintain 10 storage tanks and over 1,000 miles of water distribution mains. And that includes all the hydrants, all the valves, all the pump stations and ancillary equipment that goes with those tanks and the distribution systems. And then on top of all of that, we collect and analyze samples to make sure that the water that we provide is up to snuff and meets the Safe Drinking Water Act. That is, in a nutshell, the water utility. The wastewater utility
we have a little over 75, or a little under 75 miles of sewer main. We really only collect sewage in the city, and essentially, wastewater, domestic wastewater, is what goes down a drain in your home. We don't have any lift stations or pumps. And we try really, really hard to avoid them. Once it flows out of your house, it flows by gravity. That's very advantageous to us. Coors, as I said, provides the bulk of wastewater treatment, domestic wastewater treatment for the city, but we do have a small corner of the city that is served by the Metro Reclamation District, which is all the way down on the South Platte. And then I think I'm done. Then I'm going to turn it over to Joe to tell you about stormwater.
Good evening, Council. Joe Porter, City Engineer, and I oversee the drainage utility. As Ann alluded to, we don't run a combined sewage system, so we're what's known as a MS4, Municipal Separate Stormwater Sewer System. They're completely separate networks. They don't intermingle. We do not treat our stormwater other than by passive means, water quality BMPs such as detention ponds and the like. There's a handful of others, but detention basins are the predominant one. So some of the assets that are part of the network are inlets, the detention ponds, as I mentioned, drainage channels, storm sewer mains and the associated manholes, and a few other different types. Here's a list of all of those different types and their number. One thing that's important to note is that we have city-owned facilities that we are responsible for the O&M, the operation and maintenance of, and ultimately replacement of, and then non-city facilities that are on private property. We inspect them and we enforce some level of maintenance to make sure that they continue to run, but we aren't ultimately responsible for replacement of those. So we undertook a rate study in 2019 because it has been, I believe that'll be the next slide.
Yeah, it's hard not to click at the screen, but we have to
click at the screen, right? So we undertook this endeavor this year because while we've tweaked rates here and there, we've not looked overall at our rate structure since 91 for water and wastewater and 97 for drainage. So we formed a citizen committee to help us look at these structures, and one such member of that citizen committee, Tanya Rausch-Williams, is here to present some of our discussions and findings. And yes, it's hard to not click at the screen.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. I'm Tanya Rauch-Williams. I'm here in the capacity to represent and summarize what the committee came up with and the recommendations we want to present for your consideration. So as Anne already summarized, the City of Golden operates 3 different utilities: water, wastewater, and stormwater. And the rates really have not been reviewed since over 20 years. And so it was overdue. The city hired a professional consultant who worked with us in these meetings. We had, I think, 6 meetings and met since February on a monthly basis in the evening, and learned about the water system of the City of Golden, and then learned about the current structure and options, rate structure options for each of the different utilities: water, wastewater, and stormwater. And so in essence, over these 6 meetings, the committee learned about alternatives, and we discussed the pros and cons and came up with recommendations for each of these utilities. So briefly, the members, there were 7 members. The Planning Commission was represented, the Citizens Budget Advisory Committee, the Sustainability Board, I was a representative of that. And then we had 3 just members from the community that responded to an open call from the Golden Informer. And then in plus anybody, it was an open meeting, so anybody who wanted could come. However, they were not voting on the decisions that the committee made officially. The roles of the committee was to represent and communicate the views of the community, to provide input on the rate structure options and the associated customer impacts, and then also to formulate a recommendation that we are summarizing here tonight. There are always objectives. Each of the rate structures, achieve different things. The objectives of the rate structure for the city of Golden was, and that was non-discussable, we needed to maintain revenue stability and sufficiency, meaning that the rates as they will be defined in the future need to obviously meet the expenditures. Support of water conservation was an explicit goal given the city's objectives for water conservation. Persevere the affordability and equity between classes. I will show you how that has been incorporated in our recommendations. And then also, of course, have enough budget in the future to invest in the aging infrastructure. So there were a few assumptions that I want to briefly summarize. Those were really not to be questioned by the committee. Those were, so to speak, the framework that we operated under. The utility operating rules do not allow for any special rates or discounts for specific customer classes. That's self-explanatory. All rate structures considered must be supported by the city's current customer information billing system. So some of the alternatives we discussed were just too complex and too complicated to be immediately workable in the current billing system. So we we found solutions that would work within that framework. Then the financial analysis of the rate structure alternatives were based on 2018 demand. So that was the most recent data available. As Ann said, I think you alluded to, this was the last year that we operated under the quarterly billing. But that was the data that was available for the consultant to base the financial analysis on. All rate structure alternatives considered were revenue neutral by the customer class, so anything we'll show you today covers that requirement. The assumptions of the future costs of service for wastewater assumed that the contract with Coors will stay intact. There was some discussion on it, as it's uncertain what may happen in the future. However, it was assumed, and that is also the financial analysis, that Coors will continue under the current contract to treat Golden's wastewater. And then finally, the indoor residential water consumption is, from the city's perspective, at an acceptable minimum given the current infrastructure, and additional conservation is at this time not feasible. That was a discussion we had. Given the goals of conservation on all sectors, really indoor and outdoor use. However, in discussions with the city, we learned we had in previous years quite a substantial decrease in water consumption on the indoor use, and there is at this current time a limit on the infrastructure that first needs to be resolved and further discussed before additional water conservation indoors is recommendable. So one of the first exercises we really did is go through each of the utilities, water and wastewater specifically, and from the committee state our values and rank the values we have. Different objectives can be supported by different rate structures, and so you see the three groups here specifically for water. The ranking of the first group was really a requirement. As I stated, the rate structure and rates must be defensible. They must be revenue stable and sufficient to cover the costs. The second group here is really the more important one, which is in discussions and in ranking exercises with the committee, really for water conservation, equity between classes, and essential use affordability were the three highest ranked priorities. Again, conservation in the outdoor use for residential areas. And so for sewer is really a different story. Right now we don't have gray water use, so really everything that's indoor use will end up as a sewer amount or volume. And so when you look here at the second group, conservation doesn't stand so much in the foreground because wastewater production is sort of what it is. However, in looking at the existing cost structure, the committee decided that equity between classes and equity within the classes and essential use affordability is relevant here. And so before I show you how these values have been incorporated in the rate structure recommendations, I briefly want to show and summarize the financial summary for past costs of service and revenue in the existing rates. So what you see on the next slides are for water, wastewater, and drainage. The cost of service for the individual sectors, so residential, commercial, and multifamily units are one sector, and then irrigation. And so when you look closely at this, I'm just going to summarize it. You can look at these slides, but there's always some imbalance historically where certain costs in one sector may not be equivalent to the actual service that the sector sees. And so briefly for water, it was identified with that analysis that the residential and irrigation customers generate larger costs than the revenue, so they're underpaying. For the second, for the sewer sector, the cost of service, the residential customers actually overpay compared to the service. And then I'm going through these pretty quickly because really just as important here. For drainage, the residential customers underpay compared to the cost of service compared to the other two sectors. So this was an initial analysis because it then affected how the rate structures were actually set later on to balance this out in each of the sectors. So now we're talking about the actual rate structure recommendations. For water specifically, the rate or the payment, the costs are broken down into fixed costs and then into a volume cost, essentially a cost per 1,000 gallons of consumption. We looked at the fixed cost and learned that historically the total costs of water service, the fixed cost covers only about 6.6%. That was problematic because it may not cover, just from a revenue stability, a sufficient large amount. So the committee voted on increasing that cost. There was some discussion whether 9.4 is sufficient, but the city and the consultant thought this was sufficient, so at least we have some increase in the fixed cost charges there. Now, talking about the rate structure for the volumetric consumption of water for the different sectors, you see here that historically, really, we had in Golden one uniform rate per 1,000 gallons treated. It was $5.26. No matter how much water you're using, that was the cost. Specifically for water and residential, we had a long discussion. And we did want to find a solution here that promotes conservation on the outdoor irrigation use. And so we discussed several alternatives to the uniform structure. There's seasonal structures and different options. Ultimately, the committee found consensus that for this group and the water rate structure, we recommend to go forward with a three-tiered average winter consumption fixed structure. So what does that mean? Maybe initially a little bit confusing, but you have a basis amount of water that you have as an indoor use. We define it as 5,000 gallons per household per month. So that would be a low fee. You see actually, if you can read these numbers, that for the tier 1 rate, so that's indoor use, representative of an average indoor use, the rate is lower. So that is a driver for the affordability that we discussed. And then you have a second tier, so any water you're consuming above that, which is for outdoor use and should be sized to represent a reasonable outdoor consumption for irrigation, would be somewhat higher, rated at 6.3. These are examples. These numbers specifically, I'm just illustrating with that how the three-tier works. And then if you're using more than that, and the assumption is that this is for a residential area, really excessive irrigation, you would be charged a higher fee there. This is probably the biggest difference where we actually changed the rate structure from the uniform structure. For multifamily, commercial, and irrigation, so the two other sectors, we discussed that at length as well. However, the committee decided ultimately to keep a uniform rate structure here, but make adjustments to that rate structure to adjust for the rate of costs of service for the individual sectors. Just briefly, summary of the sewer rate. The We discussed decreasing the total revenue derived from the monthly service charge from 33.6 to 20% to maintain the revenue stability while also addressing affordability. And then we decided to recommend here to retain the uniform volume rate structure for the types of accounts, but adjust the rates again to reflect the cost of service. The discussion here was that it's, as I stated before, it seemed too complex and not really worthwhile to create a more complex than uniform structure here for sewage treatment. And then finally for drainage, retain the current rate structure for all accounts, but adjust for the rate charged to reflect the cost of service. There was some discussion about drainage, whether you should tie it to impermeable zones or areas on properties. Yes, you were a proponent of that. This is for now the recommendation. So in conclusions, the committee requests that the council adopts these rate structure recommendations. Again, those are for the structures, whether uniform or three-tiered, not for the specific numbers, and we'll be speaking to that. And then in final conclusion, we just wanted to summarize a few additional considerations that were important for the committee to summarize and document, because there's further action and further steps that was discussed that we could not solve within the time frame of this process, but there was interest to document that and have further discussions and action on that. So the first one specifically, the committee urges the city to consider incentives and education in addition to the price signals throughout the rate structures to encourage efficient water use. So obviously other boards and entities within the city will work on that. Second, the committee would like the city's public works department to enhance the use of informative messages on the customer bills to help educate customers of the usage and the need for capital projects. Right now, this information pathway is really not being taken advantage of. Thirdly, the committee would like consideration of implementation of formal financial customer assistance programs as needed for these programs, as they may increase rates in the future and may hit certain households above their financial means. And then regarding the recommended rate structure for single-family residential units that I presented, some of the members would like the City Council to consider lowering the average minimum, that's the winter consumption, the average, so equivalent to the indoor consumption of 5,000 gallons to less, to also continue to encourage indoor water conservation. I think that was it.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. Another demonstration of how fantastic our Golden residents are.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this was a fantastic committee, really engaged and connected to what was going on. And as you can see, they put a lot of thought into this process and have some excellent recommendations. In addition to some of their soft recommendations, staff came away understanding that there's some technical stuff that probably as we move forward we don't want to lose sight of. The first one of these is that we need to get after the idea of a sensitivity analysis. As we look at tiers, there's kind of two pieces of this that play into this, but how those price points change with each tier and how big those tiers are, both encourage conservation, but also have this element of them that changes the revenue and income. And we need to do a sensitivity analysis to make sure that we can optimize the conservation that we have as a goal and maintain our revenue stability. And that just wasn't part of this effort. The other piece of this that we had horrible, we worked hard at and failed spectacularly at is the irrigation, those irrigation accounts, those accounts that are just irrigation only, and the biggest customers to that end are the School of Mines, the City of Golden, and Jefferson County, everyone's HOA. And a lot of multifamily apartment complexes that do irrigation separately. Those accounts, have such a wide disparity of use that as we looked at them for a tiered rate structure, it failed miserably because you could have a small irrigated landscaping associated with a multifamily property that's hugely inefficient. But they would stay, if you kind of made arbitrary tiers, in the lowest tier because the use across this class is so broad. We had users that were using just a few thousand gallons a month and users that were using hundreds of thousands of gallons a day. And it was just spectacular. We attempted to look into it. This was one we attempted to look at with water budgets and actually look at ways to look at your irrigated area and kind of force some efficiencies. And we don't have good data about where people irrigate. We can tell you where their meter is, but we don't know what they're irrigating. So this pointed us to the need for us to look at this much more closely and to collect more data. And then finally, really coming out of this, maybe 25 years is long for this. We're not as out of whack on some of this cost of service stuff as we potentially could have become, but we need to be thoughtful about that. And then to the nitty gritty about it. Along with this all the issues of how these rates should be structured, we had a separate analysis going on with our consultants to really do a financial analysis of each of our utilities and make sure that we were collecting adequate funds and maintaining adequate reserves and making adequate reinvestment. And to this end, we are going to, staff is intending to recommend a 6.2% increase for water and a 12% increase for drainage. What we really found with drainage is that we are behind a bit on our capital reserve and our capital spending. And so this is where that became important to us. And of note, there's no increase that we're recommending for sewer. It's been many years since we have increased sewer rates. In fact, in the past, we've done some decreasing of the volumetric rates because we've over collected and done rebates for certain residents, seniors in particular, because we've over collected funds. So we're in good shape there. But water drainage rates haven't increased since those were last adopted in 2014, and we're due. Let me see. I think I might be done. Oh no. Now to visually impact what this looks like. This is looking at residential because I think this is what people kind of are in tune to. We have similar graphs for commercial and irrigation if we want to talk about those. But a typical summer bill for a Golden resident is going to go up. It's going to go up, by better than $10 a month. But if you look at the second example there, if you look at it over the course of an entire year, it's about a $4 increase. It hits on different components. The increase for drainage is big, both from getting into the cost of service for that. The residential customers had been underpaying traditionally, so they saw a bump to get to the appropriate cost of service distribution, and also this 12% increase that we're recommending. But then drainage is small by comparison. And then we're going to see some increases in water, but almost all residential sewer bills are going to go down. And that has to do with the fact that that high fixed rate was resulting in residential customers overpaying historically for it. So that's kind of the bad news. But how do we compare within the context of other utilities? And unfortunately, in the Jefferson County region, there aren't very many other municipal governments that provide all of these utility services. A lot of them provide one or the other or some mix. But what we did is we found municipal governments in the metro area that provide water, wastewater, and drainage services to their residents And we did a comparison to where Golden stands compared to the metro area. And even with these changes that we're proposing, we still find ourselves very reasonably priced in our combined utilities. So with that, if you have any questions for us, we are happy to answer them. And we appreciate your patience. There's a lot to this, a lot of moving parts, a lot of pieces. I think in your packet is the entire committee report and recommendation that I think is well written. Tanya helped an awful lot with the editing of that document. And so I think it's very complete, and hopefully that's helpful too.
All right. Our staff will be asking for direction, but first let's divide it up. If you have questions for this very complete analysis and recommendation. Casey.
Well, first off, let me just say, I read the whole report. It is an amazing report, and the level of detail and analysis and thought that went into it is really, really impressive. So thank you all for all your many hours of hard work that went into that. Just to make sure the residential tier structure, is it kind of like an income tax where you pay a rate based on this much of use and then the different rate on this much use?
Yes.
Or once you trigger to the point, does it charge for the entire?
It is a
Okay.
progressive rate structure,
It is,
just like
okay.
your taxes, yes.
All right.
So even if you tip over that, into that, only that water in the second tier will be charged at the second tiered rate, and only that at the very highest would be paid.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Any other questions? Paul?
So in terms of what you're asking of council, I'm looking at the recommendation. I don't know if we're going to get a motion, but are we approving the dollar amounts that you're proposing to change?
No. I think that it is appropriate that the, any rate changes and the details of the elements of this rate structure, both the fixed and variable costs, my recommendation would be to channel that into the budget process, where through that whole budget process, there are a series of meetings and conversations before this body for further conversation. So no, I am not suggesting that. What I would like from this group today is some direction, and I think what the committee's asking for is an acceptance of this structure that's being proposed. And then we'll take that structure and come back through the budget process with specific rates. This is our expectation for what the rates will look like, these increases and these adjustments. But one thing, we're still working with our consultants on kind of the final details. One piece that's missing right now is the non-potable rate, and we'll need to forward that through the process.
Saoirse.
A couple of things. These were fabulous, and I could see like the handout, or not handouts, but the summaries that would be great for as inserts in the water bills. They were very informative. And is that part of the plan going forward? So that's one of my questions, like informing water users
of what's coming. What we'd like to do, yes, we can. We have, remember when we started this process, we created a communication plan.
Yeah.
And what we'd like to do is kind of finish that plan and use the tools that we identified in that plan, which does include some inserts and includes additional articles in the Informer.
Okay, great. Thank you and then the second thing is, I was very interested in the other considerations and wondered, I sort of gave a little thought to, like, well, now who would that go to? And which body would do that further deliberation?
I think there's probably two groups that look at that. For some of them, it's very clearly Joe and I in our respective responsibilities with the utilities, but a lot of them dovetail with what's going on with the Sustainability Board. And so Teresa Worsham and her board will need to be engaged in kind of moving those pieces forward.
So that's part of the plan?
Yes.
And so Jeff doesn't have to Jeff and his department don't have to be involved in the financial assistance discussion?
Very true. Yes. And Stephanie Novello participated in this committee as well, and so she's connected to
Great.
That conversation.
Okay, great, thanks.
Laura?
I just had a question. I read in the report that there had been some talk about timing, given that the 2018 was still the quarterly and this year is the first year of monthly billing, and that customers wouldn't have had a chance to maybe do year-over-year comparisons before increasing the rate. But I read that there was maybe like discussion about that, but not where the recommendation was on time frame for implementation. So what was the thought on?
Well, there were a lot of moving parts on implementation. One of the things that that had us concerned, in addition to whether or not people have had a chance to kind of acclimate to monthly billing, was whether or not we could transition these new structures into our billing system, and how quickly we can do that. So as we went along, we always understood that the timing of this was fluid. But where we are now is that we are complete with this process now. Stephanie has a live test environment going using these rate structures, and is feeling, I think, not horrified that it's working. That's unfair. She's feeling confident that they'll be able to implement these, and we are at a moment in timing where we are considering the budget for next year, and so for those reasons. It's our thinking that we would go forward with a 2020, January 2020 implementation. We're not tied to that. It would just take a separate, essentially budgeting process to do it at a different time.
Can I follow up? And calendar year always sort of makes sense, but from a water usage, does it make sense to do new rates sort of in the low use, part of the year, like a January 1st versus a July 1st, or does that?
It sure gives people a chance to see what we're doing before they turn on their irrigation systems, which is always kind of, I do think that if we were to do it at the start of irrigation, it would be two changes at the same time that would feel, it could be a little shocking.
That was my thinking, so thank you.
Jim?
I got to attend 2 meetings, and we were the city and this community was so well served by the committee. The citizens were on it. They really had a lot of give and take. Staff, you did a great job, and we were fortunate to hire a good contractor. And so the trivia little brown portion up there, which I had some concerns about, is such a small amount of money that I don't have too much concern about the drainage. My whole thing was if you had this much impervious, you should pay this much if you're a resident. But within the grand scheme of things, look up there where Golden is and compare it to our neighbors. And I really want to thank the committee and the staff and the contractor. And I feel very strongly about the good job you did and would support this recommendation when you bring it from a financial perspective.
We appreciated having you and Councilor Terrace Graves at our meetings.
And Paul, you had another comment.
I'm looking at the comparison chart, and I understand that not all of those cities have the 3 utilities, but if as an average citizen just looking at it, I'm saying, what about Lakewood for water? What about Arvada for water? What about Jeffco unincorporated for water? Without regard to the other utilities, there ought to be data for that too, because the resident is probably nowhere superior as.
We do have that data. It felt appropriate to look at it as in context of the whole. If that is of interest to this group, we certainly can share that.
Well, might just be of interest to me and maybe not to the rest, but I would, representing that our water rates are really good. That is a, tribute to Sustainability Committee and to our staff with regard to the conservation. The idea that we've got a growing community, but our actual conservation on water has come down, and it's come down in double digits. So the community should be proud of that they are already conserving, and I saw that reflected in the report that you're already doing well. So I would hope that that's one of the things we communicate to the community is that, hey, good on you for your conservation, keep it up.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Anyone else? All right, let's go to the second part. It's time for council to express its appreciation and explain what to do going forward. As far as I'm concerned, great job. You've set it out and you've set out future plans, and I appreciated Saoirse's question about, who will be doing this going forward. To proceed with the plan as set out, Laura?
Yes, and this is all great, and I really appreciate it. I'm just concerned about timing. If we're going through the budget process for 2020 and we don't vote on it and agree on it until December of this year, is that enough time to communicate that, yes, we're going forward with the rate changes for a January 1 change? And so I guess I'd like some more thought on, having enough time to execute on that communication plan. How much time do we need to let residents know and to let customers know that we're going forward with the rate change if it's part of the budget process?
I think it's important that the communication is to have people engage during the budget process and understand what's coming and make it clear that this is what staff's recommending that council do, so that people are aware it's coming. Even more horrible than you guys adopting rates in December and having them happen in January is hearing from people that they had no idea it was coming. So I think our communication strategy is more about based on the feedback we get tonight about here is what is likely, here is what staff is putting forward in the budget. Here's what it means to you, and here's what you should expect in January if council agrees. That's my thinking.
Council? Saoirse?
Well, I'm looking at the memo and what the alternatives we were given. So now I'm wondering, do we make a motion? Do we do a thumbs up? Do we say, yes, we recommend adoption of the rate structure, recommended, da-da-da, we recommend including rate increases in the comprehensive rate study through the existing 2020 budget? I mean, do we need to say that formally and officially? Or
I think that's a question for staff.
And you want to take it first?
Yeah, my first thought of this is that I would not encourage you to vote on any of the rates or rate increases at this point, because that will be done through ordinance, that will be done through the budgeting process, and I don't want you guys to prejudice that process here at all. What I would like is some level of endorsement on the structures themselves. And in doing so, kind of understanding our intent in the budgeting process moving forward.
Can I just to clarify on that point though, does the ordinance we adopt later with the rates also set in ordinance the structures?
Yes.
So really what we're telling you is we endorse this idea, move forward, and both the rate and the structure will be adopted in formal ordinance later.
That actually, right? Yes, that is even a better way of saying it.
All right, cool.
I meant to say.
Okay.
Okay, before we do, Rod, did you want to?
I was just going to briefly, I think you're getting there, is asking for endorsements, and yes, you have mine.
I think it's a general endorsement. I would like to add that this is really a fascinating issue that I had never thought about before. You know, 3 different systems. And I know you've done a great video on where our water comes from. The sequel would be, where does our water go? And I think it would be really helpful to the public to understand how complex these interacting systems are and how important.
Absolutely
Yeah.
agree. On VHS tape somewhere, we have a Laura and Doug in a school bus conversation about water and wastewater. And just like this great study, those educational materials clearly need to be updated.
So we're good on endorsing the structure, and we are all really appreciative of the committee's work, the staff's work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Next, we have a resolution also concerning water, an assignment of a lease. And
I'm coming back up, but I
Are
want to
you
give these back to Stacy because apparently Jason's going to need them and I don't want to get in trouble and forget. So the second item I have before you today is that we operate a trans-basin tunnel at the headwaters of Peru Creek in Summit County. That tunnel brings water rights that belong to the city and to others through the Continental Divide into the headwaters of Clear Creek at South Clear Creek, which is on Guanella Pass. We purchased this at around the same time we were acquiring and building the Guanella Reservoir, and we bought the rights that we were interested in and the operation of the tunnel from the Vidler Tunnel Company, who held additional water rights that, as part of the purchase, we agreed to convey through the tunnel and to deliver to others, while allowing the Vidler Company to continue to collect the lease payments for this water. We have been having conversations with the Vidler Water Company about a small portion of the water rights that they had retained in that purchase and that we have been conveying through the tunnel. That is water that had been purchased by a company called Saddleback Development Company, which was building a development up really at the top of Floyd Hill. They had a 35 acre feet nominally or so that they had a lease agreement with the Vidler Water Company. They have put all but 26.2 acre feet. Well, actually, that means they put very little of it to use. And they have in excess of 26.2 acre feet that they would like to retain. But they are putting to use the balance of that water. The Vidler Water Company has expressed an interest in selling that water to the city of Golden. They have a purchase price of $589,000 and $589,500 dollars for the purchase of this 26.2 acre feet, which is in water terms a below market rate for this water. However, the first right of use for this water remains with the Saddleback Development Company, which is actually now the Uphill Company, for future use at that development should they choose to expand. We're not aware of those plans. We're not aware that they can put that water to use. And if we purchase this water and convey it, we have the opportunity to put that water to use for Golden municipal use. In addition, we would start collecting the lease payments that they have been paying to Vidler for us conveying that water through the tunnel for them, which in last year was right around $47,000. So I have before you a purchase agreement for that water from the Vidler Tunnel Company, Vidler Water Company. I'm going to get them both mixed up because I've caught them both. And a resolution for that purchase, and for your consideration.
Questions for Ann?
Because I think Jeff is in the back, that there is money appropriated that in the water fund and available for this purchase.
Thank you. Paul?
I'm prepared to move approval, but I will wait for further comments before I do so.
I don't think there are any questions, so we'll have comments after we have a motion for adoption. So Paul?
I'm ready for a motion. If you want a further comment, I'm not prepared for a further comment.
There will be comments after the motion.
I move to approve Resolution 2677 and the attached purchase agreement that is in our file with the Vidler Water Company to purchase 26.2 acre feet of senior water rights in the amount of $589,500 from the water fund.
Thank you, Casey. Now discussion. Paul, you made the motion. Do you have comments you'd like to make?
I'm in favor of it.
Anyone here? Jim?
What is our reserve in the water fund?
Sir, it's in our book.
Yeah, I didn't want to dig that far.
It's right here.
I don't think there's
No.
it is not. It's capital improvement there.
Currently, through the end of August, we have over $5.2 million in the water fund.
Thank you.
Combination of the reserve and what has been appropriated, we
Yeah.
have enough money to cover this.
Thank you.
Okay, and any further discussion? Are we ready to vote?
I
Laura?
just wanted to make the comment, since we had no questions, that good presentation and the update that we received in council about our water rights and water situation was very helpful as a precursor to this, to understand the history and the past purchase from the Vidler water in the Vidler tunnel. So I appreciate having that background before you came to us with this, because I did not know much about the Vidler tunnel prior to that. So thank you.
And we would love to have you come visit the
I
Vidler
want to go
tunnel.
visit.
All of you.
Are we ready to vote? Casey, did you?
No.
Okay, vote on Resolution 2677. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Thank you, Ann. Now, council can get ready with our big binders. The 2020 capital improvement draft budget, and we are going to. Sure. Council, short break. It's 8:18. Back here and ready to go at 8:28. How's that?
And this thing.
We're all here.
Oh, right. Okay. It is 8:27, but we're all back. So let's keep going expeditiously. Next item is the 2020 capital improvement draft budget, and Jason.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start us off, and then Jeff has any additions or corrections to what I say, or if I forget a couple of points, you can fill in. You should all have received this document, which is our capital improvement plan. And it is our spending plan for the next 10 years, but more importantly, our budget for 2020. We've also posted this to our website so our citizens can view it, so there's documents there. And they'll have an opportunity to go through it and comment in future meetings on the CIP and the operating budget for that matter. I'll walk you through a couple of slides here. I don't have too many. I just want to start off with, you don't have to read the numbers. The numbers are not important on this slide. What's important is the organization. I know this document, you're all experts on it by now because we've been using it for a couple of years in its revised format, but there's 9 tabs in here. There are 9 separate funds that make up our CIP, and each fund will have a spreadsheet like this at the beginning that shows all of the revenues, all of the expenditures, and the fund balances associated with those funds. And then behind that spreadsheet is detailed sheets on every project that's in the CIP. So this is what the spreadsheet looks like. Those are what the detailed sheets looks like. At the top of the detailed sheet is a number that is associated with the line number in the summary spreadsheet. So that's kind of how the book is organized, and it's consistent with what we've done in the last couple of years. There are the line numbers on the side. So if you're referencing a project and you want to know where it is on the summary sheet, you can find it. So overall, we have, as I said, 9 different funds within the CIP. Our proposed and recommended budget for 2020 totals just over $24 million with each of those 9 funds. That's some significant investment in the city of Golden in our infrastructure and different programs. And overall, over the next 10 years, what is in here currently as proposed is just over $217 million of investment in the city. Some of the more significant things that are in 2020, I didn't list them out on the slide. Typically, each year there are a lot of maintenance type numbers in there associated with our facilities and other equipment, but there are some exciting projects in 2020 that we were able to budget. We have some dollars associated with the design of the 6th Avenue and Heritage Road interchange, which we would like to work on to hopefully get funding for that project in the future. West Colfax Complete Street project that runs from I-70 west. Hope to do some complete street improvements there. You all know we purchased street lights. We now have to do some investment in that as well. DeLong Park has money budgeted for the build out of that in 2020. And we're going to continue to make improvements in our technology with a sort of second phase to the server upgrades that we started this year. And so there's about $500,000 associated with that. The next couple of years are, if you look at the overall 10-year picture, the next couple are tight years, and I say that in the sense that we want to try to rebuild our fund balance. So we've had several high-dollar projects over the last couple of years and have gone through that fund balance pretty quickly, and part of our focus is over the next couple of years to make sure we rebuild that fund balance. But we're still able to do some cool things for 2020. There's a tab associated with this book that you haven't had in the past, and that's projects that were submitted to be included in the CIP that we're not recommending be included at this point in time. And I put them on the screen so you could all see what they were. They're in the very last tab to the book. And they're mostly associated with, I think I issued a memo to you just before we started the CIP process, or we kicked it off in August, kind of outlining some of the reasons why there may be projects that weren't recommended to be included. And I can walk through these quickly. But in the case of the first one, the Washington and Iowa intersection improvement, we initially looked at that as part of the North Washington Complete Streets program that's just finishing up now. Unfortunately, with that project, we were not able to obtain the right-of-way necessary to make the improvements at that intersection. So without the right-of-way, the project won't happen, the improvements won't happen, and so we didn't budget that into the CIP. If at some point we're able to obtain that right-of-way we can always move those dollars at the appropriate time back into the CIP as a recommended project. Affordable housing projects is the next one. It's a significant expenditure that was proposed, and we don't have any specific projects at this point or locations. I know this is a priority of City Council, but we should look to committing, if we want to really tackle affordable housing projects or workforce housing as an issue, look for a committed revenue source in the future to make headway into that effort. Same is really true with the next one, which is Tony Gramsci's park improvements. The improvements that you see out there today are, I think, original, many of them, to when the city actually had acquired that, the park property. But there's clearly a number of things that need to be done out there, but the cost of doing those are pretty significant. And again, on this one, an additional revenue source, if we're going to make that level of improvement, would be very helpful. Or if it is a priority more than other things in the book, we can always look at changing the priority level in the future. The next item is museum space rehab. This is related to our Golden History Museum. They did some work on the interior recently, but this relates to, I think, some exterior improvements if the museum moves. So again, not having that decision. This one's a little bit not timely. Splash expansion. On this one, there's again, a fairly significant dollar amount, and we looked at what revenue would be associated with expanding Splash. And in this case, I don't know that the revenues that would be generated by an expansion would necessarily justify the cost of that expansion at this point. Next couple of items are really actually small dollar amounts when you look at our entire CIP, a downtown splash pad, Astor House Pocket Park. Both of those items could relatively easily be added into the CIP at some point, even in the next couple of years. But I think with respect to the downtown splash pad, what we've done is really like to focus first on the things we already have and maintain those things that we already have before we're adding something new to our asset portfolio, if you will. So we didn't include that one in. The Astor House Pocket Park would really be about improving that property for use by the public. But I think we really need to, before we add that in, figure out ultimately what the Astor House focus is going to be, rather than spending money first and then maybe the expenditures we'd make wouldn't necessarily align with what the future of that property looks like. So we can always add those in, but I think there's a little bit of legwork to do there first. Lions Park reconfiguration, this number is associated with some of the improvements that were initially laid out in the Clear Creek master plan. That was several years back now. You'll hear in, I think the next item actually, or 2 items from now, no, next item, Steve is going to lay out a plan for looking at the corridor. I think we need to do some planning and engage the community on that before we budget major changes to the corridor. Golden Community Center, aquatics expansion. Again, we're looking at a cost factor here that's pretty high. There are other obstacles that were indicated on that detailed sheet. But again, if we're going to make a major expansion of a facility, we should really look at what revenue source would be appropriate with that. Jackson Street pedestrian bridge, again, another one that I think would be better doing the Clear Creek planning effort first before we budget for improvements. Really the next 2, Jackson Street and the kayak course inflatable feature. And then lastly, open space acquisitions. We don't have any specific projects identified there for acquisition. I think one of the things we talked about internally was rather than set aside funding at this point, there really should be we should consider some type of overall master plan on how we're going to look at open space. And it would be very helpful to have revenue source associated with that, just like some of the other higher dollar priorities that are out there. So that's kind of the thinking on some of the things that were not included in the CIP. Now, doesn't mean they can't be in the future or even now. There are some options for those things. If you want to look at them, you're welcome to. I put a few up there. We can leave it as it is and fit it into the CIP in future planning years. If that's something that we want to look at as a priority for future years, we can place it ahead, decide now and place it ahead of a project that's already in the CIP. That might mean taking that project out or pushing something else off to align those priorities. As I said, on a number of these items, we can identify another source of revenue to pay for them. Or lastly, and this might not be appropriate for all of them, but we could modify the scope of the project so it doesn't cost quite as much. And something like Gramscis Park, for example, could be a candidate for that if we didn't make all of the improvements that are proposed and just a few, that would certainly reduce the overall cost. So some different options for you to think about as you think through the different projects in the CIP and what priority level they should be given. I think that's the last slide I had. You will note on some of the summary sheets in the CIP that there are some color coding on some of the numbers. And what that relates to is projects that have both a expenditure associated with them and a revenue source, either a grant or some other type of revenue source. We color code them to match the expenditure just so we can keep track of it better, and we know that it's tied to a specific revenue source. And that way, as we're making changes to the CIP, if we remove a project, or we have to also remember to remove the revenue source associated with it. So that's why you'll see some items that are color coded primarily in the sales and use tax fund. And I believe that's what I have. What did I miss? Jeff, anything that we wanted to point out before we take questions?
Yeah, one thing in regards to the open space, you will note in the open space fund, and it is line item 11, there is money budgeted or planned for 2020 for a master plan update. So we will look at, have a consultant or whatever, look at potential open space parcels and all of that to help us with an open space plan, and then potentially move money back in future years for open space acquisition. But we'll do the plan first, and then we'll see what that looks like.
And lastly, I would just say that as a reminder, the CIP is really a 10-year planning document. And although we're looking, we can discuss future years, our focus should be on the years in the near term, and primarily 2020, obviously, because that's the year you're going to be asked to approve later on this fall. But certainly a discussion across all years is appropriate. And really the out years of the CIP are for planning purposes. And that's why we kind of took a different approach of trying to put all the projects back into the CIP in different years where we could balance them and make sure that they were here, as opposed to how we've done it the last couple of years of leaving a lot of things unfunded and not really accounted for.
You're ready for questions?
Happy to answer questions.
Okay, Saoirse.
I can't find the place where it is, but I wanted to just ask about the process of the discussion, or where the prioritization came in terms of DeLong Park, the programming coming up for that in 2020, as opposed to Bachman Park. And the reason I say that is because of the folks who live in the Golden Terrace Village area. They don't really have a park. And so when I think about the Bachman Park, I think of that as an amenity that would really speak to the quality of life for those residents. And so I'm just wondering, I know that there are competing desires and values and all of that, but I just was curious.
I think one reason why DeLong is quicker than Bachman is the scope of the project and the dollar amount involved. We would not be able to accommodate a $2.5 million park in the next couple of years without some probably drastic changes of money allocated to maintain what we have. And so that was the primary reason why Bachman got pushed out and DeLong we were able to afford sooner.
So it's, the project itself is costs less, so it fits into the budget more easily.
Correct.
Okay.
And there are some, I'll just say there are some instances where that happens across the CIP where, something may not be necessarily a priority over other projects, but we move it up because we can fit it within, a specific year. After we budget all the things we need to budget, there may be some dollars where we can work on a smaller project. So we'll move it up a few years to do that.
Lori, did you have a follow-up
About
on that?
Bachman, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, you too, on
You go.
Bachman,
Yeah,
okay.
Bachman.
Well, because I had that similar thought, but then I remembered, I think we had actually put those dollars in for DeLong last year when we had this conversation, so I kind of remembered some of that. But here's the thing about Bachman that I'm interested in. We have money in there for the bigger project further out, like 2025, 2026. I know it's in here somewhere. But we are working on the West Colfax corridor starting in 2020. And we're gonna make it really nice and walkable and pedestrian friendly and for cyclists along Colfax. And then we're gonna have a big old piece of vacant property that nobody's going to visit on these nice new sidewalks because we've done nothing. So my request is not the big 2.5 million, but could something be incorporated in the Bachman in that time frame of the West Colfax project to provide a picnic area, a seating, a something attractive, so that as we finish up West Colfax in 2022, we're not waiting another 4 years for improvements of any sort to that property. So I know that's not the 2.5 million, and we probably haven't talked about what that would look like, but I personally would like to see something to take advantage of that lovely pedestrian-friendly Complete Streets project that we'll have done.
I could certainly meet with Rod and his staff about that. We do have money for miscellaneous park improvements within the budget, so it may be something we just take a look at, a smaller improvement in the meantime.
Yeah, just, something that would take advantage of making it so that residents can walk down and have somewhere to go or something to do.
I think a combination, as Jason said, we have, between Conservation Trust and Open Space Fund, we have miscellaneous park improvements, miscellaneous trail improvements. We can probably allocate some of that, but that also might be an opportunity for a GOCO grant. Because it is something new, we might be able to get some funding there, so we can talk to Parks and Rec about doing that as well.
That'd be, I think, fantastic for that, the residents there, and I think, to combine it with the work that's being done along Colfax to make it easier to get there, and a destination that you could walk to would be fantastic.
Did you have a follow-up?
Well, my follow-up on that would be that this effort with working with Jeffco Open Space on the exchange and the development of heritage and all these things could impact some of the things we might do in that wonderful property there with the homestead, et cetera. And so we want to be thoughtful as we invest to where we would do things or locate things, because we possibly might get more property right there adjacent to it, and even as we do the Complete Streets to make sure that great paseo we'd have there could go under the road and do the things we'd ideally like to do with that project. So I'm excited about it. I just think we need to be thoughtful, and I agree, Saoirse, that it's a need. It should be addressed.
Over here, questions? Paul?
On any of the items on the?
Any of the items?
I had a couple. One is on the Rooney Road. You know, we talked about that last year and talked about having money available this year to improve the Rooney Road soccer fields. And I've been approached by parents about that. And I see that we are only going to expend a part of that money this year, and that we've really kicked it over till next year for the Rooney Road. And I'm curious, I thought we were going to spend it this year.
Well, there was $1,150,000 budgeted for this year.
Yes.
That project has not started yet. I think we had some conversation about drainage issues and some other issues that we would need to make some evaluation before we just put new turf down without solving some of the underlying issues.
Yeah, I meant to mention that. It was on my list. So we've scheduled for you on the 17th of October a study session where we can give you a little bit more in-depth briefing on that specific Rooney Road issues, the field issues. The dollar amounts in the CIP, it's already September and the project hasn't started. So we can have a little bit more conversation on the 17th about the specific issues, but we'll have to look at how much we want to allocate. This isn't going to be enough to do everything over there. So we're going to have to, I want to brief you in full on the issues that are there, and there's some related to drainage and other things. But we'll have to make some decisions about how much we want to invest and the timing of it.
One of the things I would like to know then in October is, why have we been all year and we still haven't spent a dime and we haven't done anything? And you're saying there's issues. Well, I'd like you to be more specific about why we've not been able to do anything with it planned to do something, and we've done nothing. And, you know, I've visited other cities to see what they have, and I understand we're a smaller city. I understand that we have a smaller budget. But, you know, for parents that have kids that are playing soccer, they look at those other fields with great envy, other places, and look at ours that are, and I'm just kind of aghast that we have sat there and talked about it and talked about it and talked about it, haven't done anything. So that's one comment on Rooney Road, and I look forward to the 17th of October. I had a so we have debt service in the SUT fund for the fossil trace, and that's going to end. It's still another 10 years. Is that money at that point going to pot, or are we going to have to? And I look at you got a plan for some type of irrigation upgrade for $3.5 million. So I'm just kind of curious about what's going to happen when we pay off the fossil trace debt.
I'm not sure how to answer that. When we pay off the debt, then the golf course is not obligated for $700,000 a year. But as you mentioned, the irrigation, currently the project sheet is requesting $3.5 million to replace the irrigation system at the golf course in 2022. There is not sufficient funding or revenue available in the golf course to do that. So, and if we can piecemeal the irrigation in some fashion and make it affordable within our existing revenue stream, that's one option. Otherwise, we may have to look at issuing debt through the golf course or through the SUT fund with another payback. We'll have to figure out what that looks like. But the golf course may be obligated for more debt service to fund the irrigation system if we decide to do it all at one time like that.
Well, it appears to me that the use of the course is funding the debt service. So is that correct, or is the course income covering the debt service?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's excellent news.
That part, yes, and the course has never been subsidized with tax dollars. The bond issue that financed the golf course fronted the money, but the course is repaying that through the annual debt service back to the SUT fund. So no taxpayer dollars are subsidizing the golf course operation, and that will continue to be the case. It's just a matter of if we need to borrow money in some fashion to finance an irrigation system replacement. We'll have to figure out what that looks like and then how that impacts the debt service going forward for the course.
Thank you.
Jim?
It's on the same thing, and we may, besides a debt issue, we could even say, do we have to have a ongoing reserve buildup so that we could have the money available when the irrigation needs to be replaced and support? And so it may, if we do long-term budgeting, it may make sense to do some of that, because we have a premier facility. We're really fortunate. It's so gorgeous right now after the rains, it's hard to believe. But I think that all those things should be on the table as we go forward.
And they are right now. If there was a way to repay the SUT fund faster, we would certainly do that. Keep in mind, we also have to buy new replacement golf carts every 4 to 5 years, and that takes close to $500,000. So there's a lot of expense associated with running a course of that quality and trying to balance affordability, generate as much revenue as we can, make you happy so you can afford to go play there once in a while. It's a balancing act, and we've tried to balance it as best we can, but the course is close to 20 years old now, and that's a typical life of an irrigation system from what we're hearing. So just things that we all have to consider as we look forward with that golf course operation.
Should I follow on fossil or not?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I certainly am supportive of the two green improvements. They've needed to be done since we built the course. We've made, the staff and everybody's made great improvements on number 1 and 18, the expansion. The greens, the new cart path that goes along to 18 is protecting the course and around the traps and stuff. So much great thought has gone into doing those things, and there's a great deal of thought that's gone into all these sheets that are in our book for Fossil Trace. And so I'm really proud of what they've done. I'm thinking about from years for the next 40 years on it. It's when I'm playing at 125 or 30.
One, you mentioned the two greens, 1 and 15. There was money budgeted this year to do that, but because of the wet spring we had, it just wasn't feasible to get that done. So it's being pushed back to next year. Hopefully weather will cooperate and they'll be able to get that work done.
Okay, Laura, but, and then Rob, time is moving along, and I'd like Jason to recount how many different times we'll have the opportunity to look at the CIP. Tonight is not our last chance, and there are so many pieces to it. But we'll first have Laura and then Rob.
Yeah. So there's a lot in here about the solar projects, and one, I was really happy to see the solar PV in the water fund on the retention pond. That sounds cool. But on the other, I guess my question is, can we get an update at some point on the existing solar projects that were already done, that we're still paying the interfund loan debt service? They were approved before my time on council. I don't remember the projections and the payoff and how successful that's been in terms of recovering what we thought in terms of the energy savings. And I'd like to see that at some point, particularly, I know it's not next year, but that there's future projects envisioned, so just.
Yeah, and we can get you more detail. I believe the original payback was assumed to be about 18 years, and I think we're slightly behind schedule on the payback.
Yeah,
that.
and
But
like I said, I don't need
you
it
some
tonight,
details.
but I think that'd be great, especially if we're looking at potential future projects of a similar nature. And then the second question I had, and again was, can come back the next time we talk about it, was it's a small number, but our Public Art Commission share amount of 50,000 doesn't seem to have been sufficient for the last few years. So, where's that conversation of, is 50,000 the right number? Were these just special projects that ran over, or?
In some cases, that money's been carried over from prior years. And so we're not running at a deficit with public art.
Okay.
So if we don't spend 50 in one year, the balance carries over to the next year, and then they have money available to do a bigger project in some.
For the last 3 years, it's showing more than 50,000, so that's, the projected for this year. So that was just my question of, are we using the right number based on what they're actually doing? But we can talk about that another time. Thank you.
And Rob?
Actually, in the interest of time, I think I'll pass to our next go-around.
Jason, give us an overview.
So you have on the 26th, the opportunity, again, there's a public hearing on the CIP on the 26th. So the public will also have the opportunity to have input. And then, of course, opportunities throughout October. And I'm trying to look for the final adoption.
First week in December.
Yeah, December 5th. So plenty of opportunity for comment. We'll have a study session on October 17th where I'd like to brief council on the Rooney Road issue, because it's not as simple as it might seem. There's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more complicated than we've had a chance to talk about here. And you may want to make some recommendations or suggestions to how we deal with that in the CIP at that time. And there'll be plenty of time to incorporate that into our final version.
Okay, anything else on, I know there's a lot more on this issue, but anything more this evening? All right.
Just one other thing. You can always just email me with questions related to this, and then I will be sure to respond to all of council so you all get the answer, rather than wait for the next council meeting on that.
Quick process question. I know in years past, we had a couple residents ask to have a physical copy of this put in the library.
And it's there.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Jim?
I guess as a follow-on on what Laura said, that it probably would be good to have a historic presentation on public art, because I think we've had a lot of contributions. Sorry. It's time to meditate. But we could, we might, that would be helpful probably to get the full picture of how wonderful we've had contributions from various agencies and private individuals to have public art in this city too. And because I'm making some assumptions into the GURA budget and DDA budgets, there might have been slivers in those. And so I just think that's another one of those things we could learn more about.
Okay.
And random objects, this case. Oh.
Okay, council, let's forge ahead with the next item before we come to grips with our witching hour, which is coming to us. Mr. Glick, this is the Clear Creek Corridor Civic Center planning approach.
I damaged my map. Very quick, council. The reason public art expenditures look higher is because of what Councilor Dale said. When we have partnerships, we show all expenditures, not just the ones that we're paying for. They go through a line item. And actually, they're pretty good at making wonderful things happen with the amount of money you've given them. They would love more. And I'll be happy to provide that background. Council, this is the first of three very quick items, although two of them are huge, and you will talk about them many times a year for the rest of your life. But tonight's activity doesn't necessarily need to take a long time if you're willing. So, the first one is, see, this project is so big it doesn't fit on the screen. Relates to what staff is beginning to call Clear Creek Corridor and Civic Center, or Civic Center / Clear Creek Corridor. What we want to express to you, council, is that staff is spending a lot of time thinking about how to approach a really important and large generational type project, we started calling it. And we're recommending that we should do it differently than we were talking about in the spring. So in the packet is a memorandum from Ms. Lawrence and myself, kind of looking at a schedule that is very intensive for the first 5 or 6 months of next year, purposely to try to get to a decision point next fall. And that may or may not be where we end up, that may or may not be your goal, but in order to do it well, it will need to be extremely well thought out with great community engagement, Councilor Karis Graves, and the right skills that we may not have on staff. So tonight, however, the only two things that we want to bring to your attention and actually ask your concurrence on relate to the very start of the project. So going to the big board, as they call it on cable TV, for a number of months, when we started talking about acquiring the 7¼ acres east of what we euphemistically called east of Ford Street near 10th Street, we thought folks are going to really want to talk about this area here. They're going to want to talk about the old Clear Creek Corridor Plan. They're going to want to talk about what happens where this building is. And we're going to say no. We first need to talk about what happens in the building. So we don't think that's no longer appropriate. We think that there is a step before the community planning process where council, we will recommend that you spend a lot of time going through the feasibility study that the city manager has mentioned to you, and we've mentioned the results of it, but that a decision should be made, and perhaps not an irreversible decision, but a decision should be made by you whether the building should be considered as a likely to remain, or whether this is a clean slate. And so to that end, our closing is now scheduled for mid-October. We're thinking that perhaps in November, we would bring in the consultant that did the feasibility study, have you run through it, and have you run through the conclusion that staff has reached that for way, way more money than we thought it would take, we could have a marginally successful building. We could have an office building, no question about it. But to force fit a civic center into a 40-year-old office building, we do not think that for that level of investment, you are better off doing that as opposed to considering new construction. If that is your determination, it really opens up what the planning process is. So you'll notice in the memo, we're suggesting that you, with whatever advice you need from experts, try to make that decision this fall. The second thing is, kind of regardless of whether you make that decision this fall, staff believes that we need to look at the entire corridor for civic uses. And I noticed in the memo I was focusing on from Maple to the east end for new buildings, but there's also what happens to the Planning Public Works building. So we think you have to look at the whole corridor for uses, and that's what the outline in the memo suggests. And that's a pretty intensive activity between starting late this year with the intense community activity between February and about April. So those are the two. If you agree that we should be looking at civic uses for the whole corridor, and that civic uses really drive all the other design decisions. They drive the decisions of other compatible land uses, decisions from the 2012 plan about the west end and realigning streets and stuff like that. We think the first thing is, what are the civic uses that the community wants to see in this corridor? And leading up to, is the community ready to fund those civic uses potentially as early as a year from now? So we're hoping that you agree that we need to look at the whole corridor, and that you'll consider looking at the feasibility study probably in November and seeing if you're ready to make a determination that most likely the building won't stay or that it might still stay.
Rob.
I have to say, I got confused. I thought when this map was presented, it was a congressional district, so I'm happy to know it's city property. I agree that we should look at this as a total corridor. I think that just because we have new property doesn't mean that's where the civic center should go or the municipal offices should go. I think we should open it up and really do a thorough analysis. And I do agree that the first step is the office building there and whether it is usable. So yes and yes from my perspective to the two questions you asked.
Thank you, sir.
I agree too. I think you probably also need to loop a little red line around the annex building on that map, if I'm not mistaken. Is that true? And you go, hey, there you go.
Do you have a Sharpie?
Kind of like that little.
It would be premature to jump to that conclusion, but you probably are not surprised that staff has made the conclusion that that should not be part of the corridor and it should be an asset that you divest. So it is great when you point out our preconceived notions.
But could you also talk a little bit more about the time? I support the idea that we need to look at the whole corridor, but the timeframes for the entire project seem pretty aggressive. So could you talk a little bit more about some preliminary thoughts of if you would bring in additional consultants to help with that visioning process, or if you have enough capability without it?
And that was a question that was asked of Ms. Lawrence last time we spoke about this at the last meeting. And there is funding in the overall financing for the project, for the acquisition to do this planning. What we really need to do is really gear up on what type of skill sets do we need to look for, get the RFP out, things like that. I frankly am worried about the time frame, but the city manager has suggested that the community will need to make a big decision. And I don't know whether we have to do it only in November or there are other times of the year that we could make those decisions, but this is the most aggressive schedule to get to a decision point next November.
Yeah.
Couple of things. One, thank you for clearing up who the stakeholders were for the first step in there, because I wasn't entirely sure who was doing this review. So that is helpful to know. And as part of that, I know we talked about the feasibility study, and it was mostly focused on, the city functions and possibly cultural functions in there. Is there anything in there, or is there anything that we could bring to that discussion around converting office use to housing? So, around the country, there's lots of office buildings, old office buildings that have been converted into housing units, either totally or partially. And I'd be interested in, a blush yes or no of, is that possible for this type of structure or not as part of the review of using the building for some purpose. So I don't know if that was in the original feasibility or if that's anything that could be part of our discussion in November.
We will do our best.
But I'd be interested in that, for that discussion on using the building or not. I happen to have read a couple of projects that have been done very recently, so it was top of mind. And then on the map, could we also take out the Sharpie and put the trail and the public connections on the south side as well? So from where we connect at Vanover and then on the south side all the way over. Because I think those connections are important in the conversation. I know we had talked about a bridge over there between Parfit, aligned with Jackson. But those are important pieces of the corridor as well for access.
Councilor, I wanted to show you how I drive my staff crazy. Will you make this map? Will you make this map? So it's not the whole corridor, but when you start adding like how we treat Ford Street, how we treat Washington Street, how we treat the trail connections, the possible, if I get lost here.
That's it.
No, this one.
Yeah.
The connection adjacent to the creek, south of the mill and south of the gold apartments that we've dreamed about for years.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. All of those things.
She may be talking about
Well, no.
east of the creek. as well, where you.
Right, but I only had a partial map already done. So we will be back often this fall about this.
Saoirse.
Well, basically Casey already stole my thunder, I think, but like I'm very interested in the community engagement part, and so I'm looking forward to hearing more about that.
Chief Lawrence will be having to
Okay.
handling
I'm just
that.
raising my hand as an interested party. Jim?
I'm a little confused of where the city, I know the city limits are around someplace where the railroad is, and you and I had, as a side note, we're saying something about properties on the east side of the creek, and I'm going, let me see, where does our city limits really stop up here?
At the railroad tracks, where the railroad tracks cross 10th Street is the closest I can tell you tonight.
Okay.
And then this, through the middle of the creek. So the portion of the brewery on the south side of the creek is essentially not in the city with the exception of the parking lot at Ford Street. But along 10th Street and State Highway 58, your best landmark is where the railroad tracks cross 10th Street.
Thank you.
Paul?
Looking at the same picture, looking at the blue. So east of the current Coors building, I see a blue line that kind of cuts, is that, do we go to the creek there or do we not?
No. Directly outside the building, when we visited, there's a chain link fence, and the Farmers Highline Canal is between the property we're acquiring and the creek. So we have creek frontage, additional creek frontage between Vanover Park and Archer Street. Oops. But from Archer Street east, the Farmers Highline Canal is between the property and the creek.
Okay.
Do you have specific questions that you want council
Well-
to respond to, or do you feel like you've gotten sufficient?
Councilor Reed said yes, and no one disagreed with
And
him.
everybody was like, yes, it is.
So, and
We only needed Rob.
You can't disagree.
The idea, Councilor Weinberg's question about housing is great because we definitely would not have been prepared for that had you not asked it tonight. So next step is closing, and next step after that is lots and lots of planning work and visiting you often.
Okay. And now Mr. Glick is back.
So
And-
the next item is also a huge item with at least societal implications, if not intergalactic implications related to parking. And we're at not 9:15. I'd give you the lecture about how since about World War I, the car has become the dominant factor in cities worldwide, but especially in the United States. And it's not a particularly happy result of what it's done to cities. But cars are here. We don't all have jetpacks yet, and we need to deal with cars. So since June, the Mesa Meadows Land Company, who with me tonight are coming and saying, we intend to make a change unless you threaten me not to, as opposed to asking your permission in how permit parking works downtown, but also to update you on larger questions. So in your package, you have an updated counts. Earlier this year, you had 2014 counts and March of 2019 counts. You now have August of 2019 counts. And there's nothing too surprising with the exception of the south garage is getting used a lot more in August than it has been in the past. We have a peak at noon. So this is weekdays. This is not special events, fine arts festivals, Buffalo Bill Days. This is everyday usage. We have a big peak at noon. It tapers down at 2. It further tapers down at 4. If we count it on Friday, you have a little happy hour bump towards the end of the day. But we do not have dramatic excess capacity overall. We have about 150 to 200 space capacity of our 1,200 space public parking spaces downtown. And so the question of supply, we will have to deal with it. We will have to deal with it, And to jump to one of the very last bullets, I'm not sure, was anyone surprised that we could run a shuttle for 50 years for the same price as building a 300-space parking structure? So the idea of building parking structures on the most expensive and useful land, rather than looking for other ways to manage things like this, is something I think we should look at very carefully before we jump into that, especially since for the next few years at least, we have about 450 brand-new surface parking spaces that we own. So I don't have answers. I've been struggling the last several weeks. Should I be coming here and saying we should build a bunch of parking supply? And I don't know what to say to you, and I don't know what you should say, but it's something that societal changes predict, with the sharing economy, with autonomous vehicles that could drop us off and then go park in remote lots, that there are things that with actually transit that works for people. There are things that could happen to make it be a bad idea to build a bunch of supply for lots and lots of money on very valuable land, but it would be irresponsible of us not to be thinking about it. So that's kind of the big picture. And there's some suggestions in there about managing things, about trying to make it more attractive for employees who come into the community to use transit. And it is the chicken and egg thing about encouraging people to use a service that we know is not stellar, but you can't get RTD to improve the service if you don't improve the ridership first. So lots and lots of stuff about parking. When I was here in June, we were suggesting that as part of discussions with the Mesa Meadows Land Company about their half of the surface lot, the idea of not allowing downtown employee permit holders to use the westernmost bay. When I spoke to our police department about doing that for only half of the westernmost bay, their heads exploded and they said, you're more crazy than we thought you were. That will never work. Just the whole signage and demarcation area. And frankly, I think the counts show that we need to do something to push parking over to the east side of Washington Avenue, where there's between 5 and 6 times as much available for permit holders and the public to compete for. And so the action tonight, frankly, it's not something that needs your action, but unless you tell me not to do it, the action tonight is to very quickly change that third bay of parking in the quote Foss lot, this half Mesa Meadows Land Company, half city lot, to regular customer. And people can pay to stay there a longer time, but permit holders would need to compete for the 160 or so spaces on the west side that are still available for them to compete to, or the 650 spaces or so on the east side of Washington Avenue. In your email today, the second email that actually had the attachment, there were 6 emails that we received, 5 from businesses in support, 1 from a resident, generally in support, but raising issues that he had heard from some merchants about safety and the, quote, clunkiness of our employee permit system, which I also address in here, ways to fix it, but also we were pretty cautious when we implemented this program that employees should park for free, because we know that employees, many of them are not high wage earners. If we want to incentivize people to park in remote areas, this is kind of the negative interest rate question. It may be necessary sometime to think about, you can have a free permit to park at 311 10th Street surface parking lot, but in order to park in the core of downtown, you have some sort of fee associated with your permit. One thing that would do would be to relieve the business owner of being part of the process, because each employee would decide which kind of a permit they want. It raises all sorts of other issues, like how often they have to prove that they still have a job and different things. But we've already addressed the issue. The biggest issue for employers was that the T2 system, and we're working on them at the software company, only kept track of license plate numbers. And so Ms. Hish and Ms. Marquez and the police department are providing that service where they are keeping track of the names that go along with the license plate numbers for our larger downtown employees. So the downtown employer only has to tell them who quit. Because deleting the people, it's relatively easy to add new employees, but it was deleting the employees when they leave service that we were having difficulty with some of the businesses because it was taking too long. They felt it was too hard and clunky. The other thing I should mention is the safety issue is kind of interesting because I don't know that it's actually any different than what it is now. But a few comments. One is anyone can park anywhere they want to after 3 o'clock because we only regulate 2-hour parking on the streets till 5 p.m. and we only regulate in the lots and garages until 5 p.m. And so if you want to park in a garage and you, for example, if you're an employee and you want to park closer to where your place of business is, if you're coming in for the late shift, chances are it's 3 o'clock or later and you could just key in your license plate number and park somewhere. And I'm very familiar with a couple of downtown businesses that hire teenagers, and they're careful about that. And they sometimes have buddy systems. Today I was talking to Gary Bowersock from Mines about the blue phones that they have on campus there, and found out that they, in addition to emergency call button to public safety, they have a direct non-emergency connection to public safety, and they've been using them for announcements. And Gary was going to try to figure out how much they're used. My question was, does anyone use those since every young person in the world carries a cell phone? And the last thing is we are putting the cameras in the south garage. So I know I've gone in circles here as opposed to the way it is in the memo, but we continue to work on the continued partnership with Mesa Meadows Land Company about that surface lot, and I know that you will get complaints from some downtown businesses who feel it's an imposition to have to walk several steps further to go to the east side of Washington Avenue as opposed to that lot there. But the general consensus is that we need that lot for customers. So this is kind of tell us to stop if you think strongly that we're making a mistake.
Instructions for Steve? Go or stop?
Yeah. Well, I'm a go, but I had a couple of questions. One was the Calvary garage. Whenever it's done, what's the opportunity for employees to park in that garage if they so chose?
So my biggest concern with the Calvary project has been all the construction workers and dumpsters and fences clogging up everything down there. And right now you can't park on 14th Street because they were just pouring concrete. The one business that I know will have a relationship with them that will help is Table Mountain Inn. For customers though, not necessarily for employees. The structure is, I don't think it's totally defined in the pricing structure, but they believe they need the lower level for their own use, and part of the upper level TMI will want to use, and the other part would be available either for general public or for permit type situations. So
And
that is an
for their own
opportunity.
use, does that include the Armory building and like connects employees, people there?
No.
Or, okay.
So Armory, on the Armory property specific will only be parking for the residents of the Armory. The folks in Connects would either need to make arrangement for the garage or continue to use other locations.
Anyone else over here? How about here? Okay, stop or go? Go. Okay. Thank you,
Okay,
Steve.
so when you wake up in the middle of the night, think about, do we wait for technological and societal changes, or do we have to go build something? And then if we build something, can we figure out a way to build it to convert it into a use which all the architectural digests say that you can do that, but it's not necessarily that easily done to convert a parking structure into a other type of a building. So thank you very much. I don't want to short shrift the topic because it is huge, as we say, but one step at a time.
Okay, and this is a good step. Thanks.
So the last thing that is hopefully quick is something that you need to deal with just because you are the only entity that can grant temporary revocable permits to use city land. The long story is, and I did learn something moderately irrelevant, is on Google Earth you can go back to 1999, but you can't print the 1999 photos. The earliest I could print was 2002. And in 1999, there was nothing out there but our North Reservoir. And the picture in your book, that is what the North Reservoir used to look like when it was an above-ground tank. And it really needed to be replaced. And so a below-ground tank was built at the south end of the city property, and the north end where the above-ground tank was is some grassy area. But when this development, Canyon View Business Park, was built, Public Works utility folks put the fence about 20 feet east of our property line, mostly because the sidewalk and grassy strip adjacent to the street was a detached sidewalk. So they could have jogged the fence, but in the end they didn't. And so for the last few years, as you noted, if you've been to Holidaily or the prior tenants in the building, the building really wanted to see a higher level of maintenance for that grass strip outside our fence than was consistent with the way we mow. We mow inside the fence a couple times a year if it needs it. And Ms. Latour, who was here tonight, really, for her tenants, wanted to see something that was a higher level of maintenance. And it became kind of a sore point for both her and for the utilities that we had a set amount of maintenance that we normally did, and it just wasn't working. And so finally, Holly and I started talking about, well, on a revocable basis that doesn't allow expansion of use or anything related to zoning, what if she took care of it, had control of it, and could put a little bit of a gravel surface out there and maybe park a food truck once in a while for Holidaily and do some sort of temporary uses that could easily be reversed if it became a good idea, or if the brewery moved out. So Mr. Martin took this opportunity to update our license agreement. It used to be like 3 pages and now it's 5. But our license agreements in general have all of the protections of making sure that any improvements that are made need to be made with the approval of the either building official or city engineer, terms for revocation, and removal of improvements if necessary. So the agreement is pretty standard. We haven't done any lately, but when we talked about stuff in the right-of-way, there are years when we'd be back here 2 or 3 times with, well, here's this fence or building that's actually in the right-of-way, and rather than make them rip it down, would you do a license agreement? So we haven't done that too much in the last couple of years, but the license agreement format is pretty standard. Ms. Latour and I and Ann and her staff recommend that this is a win-win, and we would recommend that you approve the resolution 2678 and the revocable license agreement.
Questions?
I have a motion.
Yeah, if we're there, and Ms. Latour, thank you for hanging in there. We really appreciate your presence. Yeah, we won't be much longer. Paul, would you like to make a motion?
I move approval of resolution number 2678 and the referenced revocable license agreement.
Thank you, Paul and Rob. Any discussion? No. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. And well worth waiting for, I'm sure. Yeah. Thank you for being here. Council, before we go into council and staff comments and new business, I think we need to deal with our time limit because we do have an executive session after this. Jason, how long, do you have any estimate of length of time for the executive session?
Yeah, I don't know that we'll need more than a half hour, so you may want to extend it a little bit, but I don't know that we're going to need a lot of time.
All right. Is there a motion to extend our 10 o'clock deadline?
Yeah, I move that we extend our time past 10 o'clock.
To
10:30, yep, there we go.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jim and Saoirse. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. But we can be out of here sooner than that. It's time for council staff comments and new business. Laura, why don't we start with you this time?
I have no idea what to share, so I don't think I have anything pressing that can't wait till next time.
Or interesting. Jim.
Or interesting.
Okay, Jim.
A lot of interesting.
Jim?
Yes, two things. One, I post on council comments on Guiding Golden about Rocky Flats Stewardship Council. If you haven't got to read it. Other thing, I got a chance to go through the bios of this year's class for Leadership Golden. We are so fortunate to have the people that are applying, and some of those even were people who had applied to be on our boards and commissions. We're getting an outpouring of wonderful volunteers and people who love our city and want to be more involved, and I'm just blown away with the quality of the class that just graduated and this class that just come on. So I'm very proud to be an alum.
Casey.
Just a quick calendar thing I was looking at, and thinking about the ramping up of this council and the end of the year, and we always typically have a rush to do a bunch of city manager, city attorney, city judge reviews. Do we want to be careful to get those scheduled early enough that we can do those before this council adjourns and not have those drag into the new council session in January?
This has been a topic of discussion, Jason.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mayor and I chatted about it this morning. We'll add them in. I just want to make sure I touch base with the judge and Dave Williamson to make sure they're available.
Okay.
So we'll get them added on.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Saoirse.
I don't know if you know that September is National Preparedness Month. Basically, it's helping your family and your home be prepared for any emergency that might occur. And the fire chief is actually coming out to Harmony Village, where I live, to do a presentation to my community. I'm sure she'd be willing to share. But it's really about, like, if something happens and your family is separated, you know, how do you communicate? Preparing yourself to reunite or communicate when all the communication systems are down. It's actually very interesting. So I'd encourage families to do a little research, maybe talk to our fire chief and find out what we can do for that thing that's never supposed to happen, but does.
Thanks, Saoirse. Rob.
Just two quick things. The 16th is a busy night. DDA is meeting, and a number of members of GURA will be there to discuss the Legacy Fund, which is an ongoing issue, which affects us because it may affect some of those budget items we were looking at earlier tonight. Also on that night at 6:30 is a public meeting for DeLong Park at the community center to talk about proposals for that, and would encourage people to go to one or both. I looked at the DDA agenda, and I think you can see the first DeLong Park presentation before you get into DDA and the Legacy Fund discussion.
Good time management skills. Thanks, Rob. Paul?
A couple things. You know, we talked earlier about possible thumbs up on addressing vaping, and it kind of got shuffled away. I'm not sure we need to change it, implement an ordinance now, because I take good guidance from our mayor about how that could be complicated. But I think if we have different agencies that are seeking to at least show support for that we could consider a resolution. And in due course, perhaps an ordinance, but not, as the mayor noted, do something that would go on and on and on. But a resolution of support seems appropriate. And so I would still propose that we agendize this item in the near future for a possible resolution and support. So that's.
Okay, I apologize if it was perceived as being shuffled away. It was my understanding that it would be put on a future agenda, and it could be either or. An ordinance would be required for a local licensing scheme in any event. So
I have a note down to add it on our calendar.
So as a next item, when I was back in 1907, when I was running for the seat that I occupy here, I believe excuse me, Jim, something you wanted to add? And I believe if I was sitting in the audience, that the mayor would recognize candidates who were now officially on the ballot. I don't know, is that correct? Did I remember that or not? That if someone was here at a council meeting, that they would be recognized?
I think if they wish to speak, they come up and identify themselves, but I don't know that we've ever singled out people
Okay.
sitting
Well,
in the
I do
audience.
recognize Kim Brock in the audience tonight, so whether or not she comes to speak, I just want to note that. And finally, on October 3rd, in these chambers, the Leadership Golden will again host a candidate forum. And interesting this year, the Golden United is also hosting a candidate forum on the 1st of October. So although ours, the one for Leadership Golden, has been running for more than a decade with Ed Dorsey moderating that, there is a second one. And so the candidates are going to have to go two places, but I just want to remind the public that the Leadership Golden is having its candidate forum here at 6:30 on October 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a couple things. One, we mentioned earlier about putting on the agenda some way to deal with issues that affect our community but are coming from the county or the state. We have often struggled in the past with how to do it. It's sometimes hard to get credible speakers on both sides to come in. In the more recent past, we've relied on staff to put together a presentation, but I think at least the county issue and CC, which is a deep-rooting issue for the state, for half going to transportation and half to education, and then there's DD, which would legalize sports betting and have the proceeds, part of the proceeds, go to water plan projects for the state. I think there's a great component of education for council and for anyone watching. It's coming up really fast, and I know DRCOG is already voting on whether or not to support CC. How do you feel about that? And Jason, let's start with you, Jason. Do you have a proposal about how to deal with that?
Yeah, I think we could do it maybe the 26th or even October 10th, and staff can present 1A, CC, and DD, these issues, and council can discuss whether they want to take any particular positions on any of those.
October 10th, did you say?
I could probably do it toward the 26th or the 10th. 10th is a lighter day right now, but I think that's still plenty of time before the election for.
So ballots go out starting October 14th.
Right.
So
both of those days would work.
But maybe September 26th preferable?
Well, I'm not here.
But
Okay, well,
Fiscal Polly is.
thank you, Jason. Another thing, and I hope this is really quick, you know, we've had discussions about the hotline and how, you know, the community should rely on it for communications between council and staff. But now we have Ask Golden. And I would, you know, there's really good information on there, but there are more questions floating around that people ask council. And it seems to me maybe a protocol would be any counselor, you know, could relay a question onto Ask Golden and then get a solid response on it. How do you feel about using Ask Golden in that way?
I think it's awesome. And here's an example. Just today, I emailed city staff and Ann Byerly regarding a Denver Post article about huge plumes of PFAS contamination in various parts of the Denver metro area. Got an instant, beautiful response back, and now that only lived with me. And that is the exact kind of thing that would be really terrific to have a public record of those kind of things and exchanges going on and on. I think that would be, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And those are moderated before they get posted publicly. Is that correct, Jason?
I think we do review them, yeah.
So if there is, so you have
Just
a
to
way,
make sure.
yeah.
But I think if you sent us an email and sometimes it's an issue that many of you are hearing from different people, and what I don't like about how we do it now is that we have to respond 5 different times to the same question that's asked a little bit differently. If you're getting a question and you email it to us and say this could be beneficial for the entire community to hear, then we can post it on the Ask Golden segment, because I think it's just helpful to have it out there.
So in that regard, the process would be, we shouldn't post it on Ask Golden first.
You could do it either way.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
could do
you
it either
then
way.
could take, if 5 of us email separately, you can take them, consolidate them into a logical question.
Right.
And post both the question and the answer on
Correct.
Ask Golden.
Correct. And we'll let you know it's there, and then if you're getting additional questions, you can just send people the link right to that, and you're not having to retype or re-answer the question that's already been there.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll clarify this
now-
eventually.
Now it's staff comments time. Do you have any?
Nothing, Mayor.
Jason?
I also have nothing. Thank you.
The line back there, starting with Steve. Carly. Oh, all right.
Search time.
Oh, Saoirse's in charge.
Meditating or
Okay, Saoirse. You have a motion?
I move to adjourn into executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, parent 4, parent B, and CRS 24-6-402, parent 4, parent E, 1.03, 0.050, parent A, parent 2, Golden Municipal Code, and 1.03, 0.050, parent A, parent 5, Golden Municipal Code, to confer with legal counsel for the city for the purposes of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions and for determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators regarding an intergovernmental agreement with the Colorado School of Mines.
Well done. Is there a second?
Second.
Laura, thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned until we go as fast as we can.